Good morning and welcome to the Fund's inaugural Champions of Change Summit. I'm Judy Bell, Board Chair of the Fund for Women and Girls. Kicking off inaugural events such as today is a testament really to our staff at the board at the Fund and has performed during the last year. Their commitment and dedication, along with working with our board members, especially Patty Diggin and Tiffany Scott. They have organized a real powerhouse of agenda and panel today in the keynote. You know, while our Champions of Change award events is an annual event recognizing companies and the Gladys Black Women in Distinction Award, this is really awesome that we can take 4 years of these annual events and bring these leaders and companies together to really learn and go more in depth on their achievements and strengths of these amazing organizations and leaders. You know, I'm so honored to be the chair of this organization, especially this year as we celebrate our 25th year of really helping women and girls and all the achievements that we've done in the last 25 years. You know, another milestone that we had this year is, as you noticed, we have a new logo, we have a new brand, and we're so excited about this and to share this with you. And it's really, now we're known as the Fund for Women and Girls, Igniting Change in Chester County. And really today's event is just another example of what the Fund is doing as far as leading our community and what we really need to do is ignite change in our area. And now I want to introduce a brief video from our Executive Director, Michelle Legaspi Sanchez. So hold tight while we share my screen. Hold on one second. And we're going to talk about the evolution of our branding.
Over the past 25 years, the Chester County Fund for Women and Girls has grown into a renowned community resource and leader. We have demonstrated that an investment in women and girls is an investment in the entire community. Hello from the Chester County Fund for Women and Girls. I'm Michelle Legaspi Sanchez, Executive Director. From a group of women talking around the kitchen table as friends, committing themselves to helping women and girls in Chester County, to a nonprofit devoted to community-led grant-making, leadership development, and supporting other nonprofits working to improve the lives of women and girls, to a leader in providing young women with opportunities to rise and give voice to their passions as future advocates and change makers. And finally, to being a go-to source of information for our community-based partners and a champion for addressing the needs of women and girls. As our work and impact have grown, so has our need to convey a stronger, bolder visual representation of that impact. One that weaves together our past, present, and hopes for the future, and the fabric of the community to make it stronger. After a year-long exploration of our identity, we landed on the perfect name and visual to encapsulate all that we know and love about our organization, while also reflecting our bold vision for the future. For instance, the weave of the W in our new logo represents our efforts to weave together the many partners and supporters of our work, which underlines our role as a connector and leader in bringing folks together around the table in the fight for gender equity. Now we are thrilled to share that new vision and welcome our friends and supporters to join us as we move forward together as the Fund for Women and Girls, Igniting Change in Chester County.
Thank you, Michelle. Well, I you know, as being part of the board and going through this exercise over the last couple of years, we definitely believe that our new brand and igniting change in the community is really demonstrates our commitment and our future. And while we celebrate our 25th anniversary, we are definitely looking forward to the next set of objectives and goals that we have set out for ourselves, which are very aggressive. And I have no doubt that this staff and this board will be able to pull those off. So please check out our e-news and definitely visit us on social media at the handle @thefundchesco. and then stay connected as we move forward and definitely change and help us ignite that change that we need. So now let me introduce again, Michelle Legaspi Sanchez, our Executive Director of the Fund, to kick off today's summit. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Judy. As Judy said, my name is Michelle Legaspi Sanchez, and I'm the ED of the Fund for Women and Girls. And we are really pleased to have you here with us this morning. As you heard in the video, in the last 25 years, the Fund has really risen as a go-to source of information and a champion for addressing the needs of women and girls. I can tell you that over the last year in particular, our commitment to carrying out this role has been so important as we have seen COVID-19 ravage not only community health, but economic viability, particularly of women and girls. COVID has brought to light the inequities that we at the Fund have always been fighting. Through our Blueprint report, which is our groundbreaking comprehensive study in partnership with Westchester University that looks at how women and girls are faring here in Chester County, as well as the state and national level, we knew that even before COVID, the wage gap here in Chester County is wider than it is at the state and national levels. And we also know that 40% of single moms here in Chester County live below the poverty line. So COVID has only made economic advancement even more difficult to achieve. For example, with millions more jobs lost by women than men, our current downturn has been labeled a she-cession. Not even 4 months ago, employers cut 140,000 jobs in the month of December alone. Women accounted for all of those job losses. And sectors dominated by women, particularly women of color, like retail, education, healthcare, service, hospitality, they all have been harder hit, leaving more women and their families to face food and housing insecurity. It is certainly not a pretty picture. As we all continue to move towards recovery and building back post-pandemic and post-significant racial trauma, we cannot build back to the status quo. If you're familiar with the Fund, you know that the visual of conversation around a table is important imagery to us. It was these conversations around the kitchen table, in boardrooms or elsewhere, that seeded the start of our organization and made the vision a reality. Now, as all of us reflect on our roles in building back a stronger community, workplace, or even ourselves personally, who has represented our tables? Who has a seat and is part of the conversation? Moving forward and doing better requires bringing all voices to the table, not just those we are comfortable with. We are so honored to have the lineup that we do this morning because they embrace this idea. Over the last several years, all our panelists have been recognized by the Fund as honorees of our Champions of Change Awards for their exemplary efforts to bring women to the table. In other words, they all have a track record of success in responding to barriers that women face towards economic advancement and in their climb to leadership. We are so pleased that all our honorees have agreed to come back and share their motivations and strategies that they have utilized in their journeys. So we'll be starting our morning first with our keynote, Dr. Katina Sawyer, and after we will welcome representatives from our 4 Corporate Champions of Change Award recipients for a panel discussion. At around 10:25, we'll have about 20 minutes of networking through breakout rooms or just a chance for you to take a break. And finally, we will come back together at 10:45 for our last panel with our 4 Women of Distinction honorees, and that session will end at 12. And so before I introduce our keynote this morning, Dr. Katina Sawyer, I just wanted to go over some housekeeping notes. First, please feel free to drop your comments and your questions in the chat box. We really invite you to participate fully this morning through the chat and through social media as well. There'll be a chance to take questions from all of you with our keynote as well as our panelists. You're also welcome to include the link to your LinkedIn profile in the chat box. We'll be sharing the profile links that come in the chat throughout the event and then after, and this is just a way to kind of help us all stay connected in our virtual world. And just one last tip, when you write your name in your square, feel free to include the name of your organization, your company, or the group that you're representing. Again, just another way to help us connect when we can't be together in person. So I'd now like to introduce our keynote, Dr. Katina Sawyer. Dr. Sawyer is an assistant professor at George Washington University, and she's also the co-founder of the company Workr. And you can read more about her in the handout with all speaker bios. believe we sent that yesterday via email, but we will also be putting that in the chat. I first learned of Katina about 5 years ago when I was reading an article about Pennsylvania's rank of 38th in the country when it comes to conditions for working moms. Katina, who was then at Villanova, was asked, what can Pennsylvania employers do to do better? Here's her response. I think that companies can offer family-friendly benefits like on-site childcare, flexible work schedules, floating holidays, and pooled PTO and sick days. However, I also think that organizations need to address the issue of gender bias and stereotypes dead on. They need to create an understanding that women may be facing unique challenges at home that may cause them to have to shuffle their work around more creatively or to multitask when necessary. When companies truly honor that we as citizens have a responsibility to support good, strong family units, they begin to recognize that work and life are really mutually sustaining. I was struck by Katina's comments at the time and how she really put the onus on companies and organizations. I had to meet this sharp young professor, so I emailed her, and she wrote back within an hour. And ever since that time, I have really benefited from her thought leadership on these issues. It really was her research that challenged me to think about what the fund can do to help emphasize the role of companies, businesses, organizations, and leaders to be gender responsive in the workplace. So now, as we welcome back 4 years of our champions, both companies and individuals who've been active in creating culture, policies, and initiatives that show an understanding of what Katina was talking about, it seems very fitting to also welcome her to share her insights as well. So Katina, I'm happy to give you the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Michelle, for that awesome introduction. I really appreciate it, and I'm so happy to be here. The work that you all do is amazing and so needed. And so I'm just glad to be a part of this and to see all you folks here supporting the work that's being done, which is so wonderful and helping so many folks. So I am going to share my screen now with you, and hopefully this is going to work and you will see it. Can you all see this window? My slides? Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. So today I'm going to be talking about the attributes of inclusive leadership. And the reason that I'm talking about this is because I was lucky enough to be awarded a grant from the National Science Foundation, which has allowed me over the last few years to study what it is that is actually encompassed in inclusive leadership. Michelle mentioned that I have a company called Workr, and through that company, we've offered over the years many trainings in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. I also teach courses at GW on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's my primary research area as well. So I've spent quite a bit of time studying these issues, and my background is in industrial organizational psychology. So I have a PhD in IO Psych from Penn State, and I also have a PhD in gender and women's studies. So sometimes people think it's odd to put the idea of sort of structural change, gender, more sociological, and sometimes even philosophical ideas about how gender shapes the way that we see the world and how others see us. Together with business, which, when I was going through graduate school, I was taking courses both in how to make businesses more productive and also kind of how to restructure society so that gender differences and norms could be dismantled. And so putting those two ideas together seems a little strange. We don't often talk about them in the same space, but I actually think they make perfect sense together because gender has a lot to do with the way we work, how people view us at work, and how our work actually shapes the lives that we live. And one area that I find that organizations struggle with is the area of inclusive leadership. And the reason for that really lies on the fact that academics, individuals who are researching these topics have spent a lot of time studying and understanding what not to do when it comes to DEI. So don't create a harassing environment. Don't create an environment where there's unequal distribution of opportunities, et cetera. But we don't know a lot about what to do. So I would deliver trainings on DEI, and at the end, leaders would be very interested and say, this is great. I'm so excited about getting on board with this. What do I do once our company is sort of at the neutral place? How do we move it into being proactively inclusive? And the research doesn't really have an answer for that right now. And so through my NSF grant, I've been working to better understand the answer to that question so that I can both inform clients who are interested in proactive inclusivity, as well as students who often have this question as well. So that's what we're going to be focusing today for our time together. And so I'm curious with all of you, if you might take a second for me and think about what you think inclusivity entails. So maybe we can do a quick chat function here and try to talk about what it is that you think inclusivity actually entails, or if someone wants to take themselves off mute quickly and just share with me some words that they think might be a part of what inclusivity entails. So if anyone here wants to throw something in the chat, what you think is involved in inclusivity, I would love to hear from you quickly. So throw your ideas in, just get some things going. Yeah, all voices are respected and heard equally. That's great, Tiffany. Creating a space that everyone can access and where they feel comfortable and welcome. Wonderful. Actually listening to people's views and thoughtfully considering them. Yes, listening is not just about hearing people, it's also about making other people feel heard, right? Not judging anyone, creating a culture where everyone is equally valued, being adept at discovering what each team member needs to be at their best. These are wonderful. An environment where people feel welcome and have access to the same opportunities and resources. Yes, so you're all doing awesome. These are large components of what I'm going to present to you. But the big issue of what I'm going to present is that everything about inclusive leadership has to be behavioral, right? So how do we ensure that there's equal access to opportunities and resources? How do we actually lead meetings more inclusively? How do we make sure people feel heard and respected, right? So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But these are wonderful and certainly a big piece of the puzzle here. I saw the use of the word equality a lot. Equality is part of the puzzle, giving everyone the same thing, but we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of equity, which is giving people what they need, which was also mentioned in here. So inclusive leaders actually practice equality and equity, which we'll talk about. So glad to see both of those things came up in the chat. So I want you to think about a time that you might have enacted inclusive behavior. And then in the chat, I want you to think about, has someone ever served as an inclusive leader for you? So think about times that you've tried to be inclusive, and then try to think about who has done that for you. So I'd like to know just in the chat, has someone ever served as an inclusive leader for you? And how did they do that? So what are some of the things for you personally that you've experienced over the course of your career? In the interviews that I'm going to be sharing some data from that I've conducted in this space, people have actually nominated these individuals as being inclusive. And so this is the exact question that I asked them to think about. Who has served as an inclusive leader for you and what did they do? Solicited input, gave job referrals, great. Yes, actually advocating for opportunities is very important. Perfect. Asking for your input. Anyone have anything else that they have seen an inclusive leader do for them? Providing you with unspoken rules or expectations. Yes, the political information that we need is really important at work and it is not equally distributed. Gave a seat at the decision-making table. Yeah, opportunities, advocating. Allowed me to participate in our recruiting program. Direct feedback. Yes, so important also from a gender perspective. Allowed me to take leadership roles. The president of the company made sure I was included and heard when you were in a minority position within the company. That's wonderful. Mentorship and being brought into the conversation. These are all wonderful. I'm really glad to hear that you've had experiences with inclusive leadership. And certainly this echoes a lot of what I'm going to be presenting today. So I'm glad that some of you have had these experiences. If you haven't had these experiences before, hopefully this talk allows you to better locate these leaders in your lives, but also to help grow these capacities within your organizations. So this is awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the reason that I embarked on this area of study is because I felt like we knew a lot about what not to do in the DEI space, but we didn't know a lot about what to do. So we have really good definitions of what a lack of inclusivity looks like. And we know what it feels like when you're excluded, right? But we don't know a lot about how to proactively create inclusive environments from a behavioral perspective, right? We know a lot about how inclusivity makes us feel, So in the academic literature, a lot of the ways that people describe inclusivity is a feeling of belonging, a feeling that everyone is welcome. But that kind of begs the question of, well, how do I make people feel welcome? How do I make people feel that I belong? And also, not just how do I create an area of belonging and welcome, but how do I ensure that that belonging and welcome extends beyond people who look like me as the leader and actually extends to a diverse team of people, so that I'm not assuming that what makes me feel like I belong or like I'm welcome is actually the same thing that makes everyone feel like they belong or they're welcome. So this is a really key, important competency that we've overlooked in leadership because truly we don't know how to train people to be inclusive. So this is a missing puzzle piece that I'm working on to fill. So how am I doing that? I actually did a pre-study for this where I interviewed over 50 individuals who are not in STEM to kind of derive some of the questions and behaviors that might inform the current work. In the current work, what I did was I interviewed 43 individuals in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics industries. And the reason that I selected STEM is because what I found in my initial study was that the individuals who were reporting these behaviors were often in industries who were further along in terms of their DE&I journeys. And it seemed that the behaviors varied according to individuals who were facing more barriers within their organizations to inclusivity versus leaders that were in organizations who for a long time had already been focusing on DE&I or already had employee bases for a long period of time that were more diverse. And so what I decided to focus on STEM was because if we pick an area that has traditionally been less diverse, so there's a much lower percentage of women and racial minorities in STEM than there are in other fields. If we picked leaders from these areas and their followers to explain inclusivity, it's more likely that we can translate from a more traditional field to a less traditional field than vice versa. So we don't want people trying to enact behaviors that work in a field that's further along in terms of DE&I and then turn around and say, well, it may have worked in your organizational context, but it doesn't work in mine. So we're sort of starting with a more extreme example in order to back translate these results, because it's easier to put these in place in an environment that's already more inclusive than to go in the opposite direction. What we did was we identified individuals who are minorities in STEM, and we asked individuals to self-identify as minorities, and most individuals that we found were identifying as either women or racial minorities. We also had a variety of individuals from the LGBTQ community, as well as leaders that they nominated as being inclusive. So not only did we identify individuals in STEM who are minorities, and ask them about how have they benefited from inclusive leadership and what does inclusive leadership look like to them, but also we interviewed the leaders that they nominated. So we asked them, could you give us the name of a specific person or people who have been inclusive to you? And then we asked those leaders, what are you doing? So sort of two different perspectives on the topic. Interviewees ranged in age from 26 to 68 with an average age of 47. The sample was 95% female and 66% white, so much more female than the United States population and slightly less white than the United States population. And the average organizational size was about 26,000 employees, so large companies here. And most of the individuals that we interviewed were really high ranking. So for leaders, positions range from CEO to CTO to senior director, and for followers, positions range from vice president to senior director to senior manager. And the sample was split 28 followers and 15 leaders. We transcribed all of the interviews verbatim and went through a very rigorous coding process where we identified themes across all of the transcripts that emerged from the interview work that we were doing. And actually from this work now, we're creating a measure. So based on the behaviors that we uncovered that I'm going to present now, we're also creating a measure that you can use in your organizations to determine whether or not individuals are behaving inclusively, and also to sort of calculate a quotient of inclusivity within your organizations. So that's sort of the next step of what's to come from our research, but I'll give you a look at the findings now. So first, something that emerged: what makes someone an inclusive leader? So what were some of the experiences that actually prompted individuals to engage in inclusive leadership? So the first piece is that a lot of individuals had past experiences with inclusivity. So they had viewed themselves as having had an inclusive leader, and a light bulb kind of went off that maybe that was a form of leadership that they would like to do better. We also found that individuals often had a working mother who had struggled to gain inclusivity within their organizations, and they looked at that as an opportunity for them to pave the way for the next generation to make things easier than what they saw. And this was true for men and for women. Having a working mother seemed to be an impact or seemed to have an impact across gender. And strong interpersonal skills. So a lot of these individuals had spent time growing their relationship building capacities through leadership development. So they were quite good at connecting with others. So some leadership development skills more broadly can help build a foundation for inclusive leadership. And a lot of them had achieved position power. So in our sample, as I mentioned, these folks were fairly high ranking, although we think that some of these behaviors can translate to other levels as well. But these individuals had the ability to shape not only their interpersonal relationships with others, which I'll talk about that anybody could do, but they also had the ability to shape systems and the ways that systems worked. And they advocated for systemic change as opposed to just advocating for interpersonal changes. So let's dig into the behaviors. I talked before about this idea of equality, equity, and justice. And I just want to take a second because I really like this graphic that I found online. But it helps me in my classes and with clients to describe these differences. And what we saw leaders doing in this sample was really what we see in the lower right-hand corner. So we can see in the top left, in a situation with inequality, both of these individuals have been tasked with picking apples. In the unequal situation, all the apples are on one side of the tree and they're just falling into the hands of the one person while the other person's on the other side trying to wonder what's going on and why they're not able to get to any apples. In a situation of equality, which sometimes can be useful in the workplace, but doesn't fix systemic issues, they give everyone the same ladder, right? So now you're heightened, everybody gets the same thing, but they're ignoring the fact that the tree is leaning towards the person on the left. So if we're interested in understanding these two individuals' apple picking capabilities, we're not really able to get a sense of how good of an apple picker the person on the right is. What we're really seeing is a product of the fact that the tree is leaning towards the person on the left. Giving them the same ladder actually doesn't help solve the problem. In a situation of equity, we might say, okay, looks like the person on the right needs a taller ladder in order to reach the apples. However, there are still a lot more apples on the left side of the tree. So even though this person can now reach some apples, there's still a lot more apples for the other person, and their apple picking capabilities are still not being fully reached. On the right lower corner, we see justice. This situation actually fixes the tree so that the apples become more evenly distributed. And now both individuals have an equal opportunity to demonstrate their potential at apple picking. So the number of apples in their basket now accurately reflects their talents and skills, as opposed to reflecting a system that leans in one way or another. And when it comes to gender, we know that the tree often leans away from women. And when it comes to racial justice, we know that the tree often leans towards white people and away from racial minorities. And we could think about this in a variety of different diversity characteristics. And of course, all those characteristics intersect. And so it creates sort of compounding injustices that we need to right the tree for. So when I work with clients and when I talk to students, I don't want them to be in bucket upper left-hand corner or upper right-hand corner, giving people the same ladder. I want them to really think about how can we fix the tree and creating systemic change in organizations as opposed to band-aid solutions for injustices, which is what these leaders are doing. So let's talk about the behavioral definition of inclusive leadership. So there are 3 categories that came out of inclusive leadership from my study. And I'm going to delve into each of these in a little detail. Practicing effective talent management, driving equity from the top down, providing inclusive mentoring and coaching. So with regard to practicing effective talent management, the first piece of this is that individuals were very open to providing access to organizational resources. They did not show preference for individuals who looked like them in making these decisions. They truly were thinking about what did people need to get their jobs done. People who worked for inclusive leaders felt that they could go to these leaders, tell them what they needed to get their job done, and that their voices were heard and that they were provided with those resources in an equitable fashion. So they also felt like if there were individuals who had been consistently getting resources and they had been consistently being left out of getting resources, that these leaders recognized the historic pattern that had existed in access to resources and often distributed more resources to those who had been left out of resources over time to try to right the tree. So it's not just that they gave everyone the same resources, they also recognized historic inequities in distribution of resources and tried to make up for those. They also provided support and open communication. These leaders frequently met with followers. They had standing meetings with followers where they discussed all kinds of barriers and successes that individuals were engaging in the workplace. And they had a very open communication style. So they made it clear that, you know, as long as it was professional, there was no topic that was off the table. So followers could come to them with issues about overcoming barriers in the workplace. They could talk about their career paths. They could talk about life issues. So they were not afraid to tackle issues of things that were going on outside of work. You know, you're having an issue finding childcare, and that might be impacting your ability to show up at work. Let's talk about that. Let's brainstorm that. Let's figure out a solution. So they were very supportive and open in their communication style. And they also aimed to create consistency in talent management practices. So they did things like blind recruiting, taking names, zip codes, addresses off of people's resumes. They encouraged individuals to look more broadly for folks to fill positions. So for example, I heard a lot about individuals pushing for recruitment at HBCUs or at women's colleges, for example, to find individuals who are interested in STEM in a broader net, right? And they wanted to be consistent about when people were brought into the fold from the recruitment perspective, that when they were being selected, that managers were trained to look at and to ask interview questions of candidates in a very consistent way. And they also built safeguards into the process to ensure that people weren't being viewed differently because of their identity as the selection process unfolded. So they monitored very carefully who was being recruited, how recruitment was being done, and what information was being taken into account when people were being selected. And they also took a look at ensuring that performance management systems were equally, everybody had an equal chance in performance management, that ratings weren't skewing in one direction or another based on identity. And they also ensured that professional development opportunities were distributed according to talents and skills, and that they were giving an equal opportunity for people to demonstrate their talents and skills. So they saw themselves as sort of providing a soil for individuals to grow in, and they equally watered all the plants. And then if one plant grew higher than the other, that was a good indicator that that person was actually the top performer. But they weren't neglecting certain plants and watering others, and then looking at how high those plants grew and thinking, wow, that's about their talents and skills. They were really ensuring that they were providing a fertile ground for everyone to grow, and then distributing performance rewards based on who did the best in that equal soil, basically. So that was the effective talent management piece. They also tried to drive equity from the top down. So they created formal avenues for enhancing equity, like employee resource groups, workshops, or leadership development programs that were targeted toward minority employees. And they also engaged in a lot of diversity and equity and inclusion training and awareness raising. And they provided budgets for these things if they had the capability, or they advocated for budgets for these things if they did not own those budget lines. They also were willing to demonstrate courage, so they pushed back against other leaders or other individuals who might report to them when they saw bias. They didn't let it sit. So a great example of this, a very, very senior leader in a tech company was in a board meeting. They were advocating for who should fulfill the next very high level slot within their company. And all these interviews are anonymized, so I have to be careful not to share any identifying information. But basically, he brought to the table a woman that he had been mentoring for a long time, who was extremely equipped to take on this position and was going to advocate for her to take on the role. And after he advocated for why he thought she was a good fit, another man in the room said, yeah, I'm sure you really liked mentoring her. She's really easy on the eyes. And distracted the conversation away from her talents and skills, which were the highest and most qualified of all the candidates that had been put forth. He said he recognized this as an opportunity to change the culture in the room. He waited an uncomfortably long period of time, paused, and said, what that woman looks like has absolutely nothing to do with this conversation. I want to retract that information from our conversation because it's distracting from her talents and skills. We haven't made comments about people's appearances who are men that have been brought up in this conversation. And so I'd ask us all to not consider that, and I would prefer no one to make a comment like that again. And he said there was a long pause, and the guy that made the comment said, you know, I want you to know I was just joking. I realized she's very talented. And he said, well, I'd like us to be in a workplace where no one really finds that kind of joke very funny. And he said the whole room kind of went silent, and he felt happy that he said it, but he wasn't sure how it went over. And after the meeting was done, he said he received multiple emails from men in the meeting saying that they appreciated that he made a comment because they also felt uncomfortable but didn't know what to say. So sometimes breaking the silence and creating an opportunity for individuals to recognize that a culture shift is necessary can be just the thing that's needed to start actually changing the culture towards inclusivity. They also encourage informal support for equity by attending ERG meetings, by kicking off trainings, by doing things that demonstrate that they believe that these avenues are important. And they also are encouraging other people to attend and speaking about constantly the importance of DE&I in the workplace. And the last piece is providing inclusive mentoring and coaching. So they recognize that some individuals are more likely to be overlooked in the organization than others. And so they aim to provide targeted visibility for individuals who are less likely to be seen because they've been less represented historically within the organization. So they provide exposure for minority employees by connecting them with high-powered individuals. They make sure that minority employees understand their value, talents, and skills by giving them clear feedback about their strengths and weaknesses. They enhance their organizational knowledge and political access by giving them information that other folks might be getting informally that they don't feel these individuals are likely to be getting. And they really strive to overcome their personal blind spots, and they're very open to feedback. So they ask for feedback about their inclusivity and the extent to which they could get better and grow. So to wrap, because I only have a minute left here, people reported widely that inclusive cultures bring results. They said that individual performance, team performance, and organizational performance increases. The perceptions that you're best in class rise, which make it easier for you to recruit and retain great talent. And everyone is able to move throughout the organization based on their potential and talent. So people report higher job satisfaction, greater commitment to the organization, lower turnover, and lower turnover intentions. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know that was kind of a rapid fire talk on inclusive leadership. Hopefully that was helpful. And if anyone has any questions for me about this presentation, you can send me an email. You can find me on social media at WorkrBeing, and you can visit my website, workrbeing.com, to find more information. We have a blog, we have a podcast, all kinds of stuff there, which centers around employee wellness, but also DE&I as a component of wellness. So I am gonna turn it back over, and thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Katina. We do have time for a question. If anyone has anything that they want to send through the chat now, we can certainly make time for that. It was a lot to absorb, but I really appreciate how concrete the examples were, and how just you know, to be able to implement things that are really concrete and you know, applicable to a lot of different workplaces and organizations.
Yeah, if anyone has a question, I'm happy to field question. I see some stuff that popped up in the chat while I was talking about the visual. I was so happy that someone found it. Oh, asking about, is the study published somewhere we can find it? That's a great question. We are working on publishing this study right now, so I have a preliminary version of it written up, but I can definitely let Michelle know when we're ready to release it so that you all can have a copy. The goal of the NSF grant is to ensure that there's widespread distribution of these findings, so the most number of people can implement it in their workplaces. So I'm sure that they would love for all of you to have it as well.
Great. And Katina, I know that you have a podcast where
Yes.
I think that you tackle some of these issues. Do you want to tell people how they can find that?
Yes. So my podcast is on workrbeing.com. That's WORKRBEEING, like a little bee. And you can find episodes there about all kinds of DE&I related issues. I see some stuff coming through in the chat as well. So the example was men to men. What about women to men? So we didn't have a lot of men followers in the sample because we had specifically targeted minority employees. I mentioned that we had some individuals from the LGBT population. Those individuals actually were women. So we did not have very many men in the sample at all who were followers. The ones that we had in the sample were leaders. So I don't have a lot of examples from my data of inclusive women leaders to men, although I would assume that men who hold other identities that are minority identities would similarly benefit from, as well as these acts will translate. People talked about how whole teams really loved working for these inclusive leaders and benefited from their leadership regardless of their identity. So we hope that that will generalize, but there's further studies or further research that we could do on that. When you have leadership that is rigid, not progressive, and not interested in professional development. So one of the things that these individuals did really well was learn how to connect with individuals who had power and to advocate for the importance of these kinds of initiatives. They often tapped into the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, trying first to make the case for why this was good for the business if they had someone who was rigid, and then moving into a values case as time went on. So often unlocking the ROI on DEI helped people have those conversations. Again, these were pretty high-powered individuals in the organization, but we saw their followers actually following in their footsteps and trying to enact these practices in their own teams as well. So individuals who had less power in the organization, and what they tried to do was advocate, find champions, and create sort of coalitions that then would present the importance of these things to senior leadership. And how this translates to large companies, to smaller organizations, yes. So the biggest issue is the budget, right, in the smaller organizations. But some of these behaviors cost nothing, right? Like being diligent about how your practices are creating or not creating equity is something anybody can do. Being open to your own blind spots, asking for feedback. One of the things I didn't get into was running meetings inclusively. These leaders would take notes about who said what. And if someone tried to take credit for an idea 20 minutes after another person said it, they would say, oh, that's interesting. So-and-so said that 20 minutes ago, right? So there are certain things that you can do to run things more inclusively from a behavioral perspective that don't require budget. And maybe some of these things that require more budget may be off limits for individuals in smaller organizations. A lot of managers don't want to take the time to practice inclusion. That's very true. So one of the biggest barriers and challenges that we've uncovered is a time and resource crunch. And I didn't get a chance to get into how these inclusive leaders navigate that tension, but what they need to do is weigh the risks with the rewards. And often what they'll do is camouflage DEI strategies as other things, which I could get more into, to try to create longer term change so that they don't get ousted from circles of influence immediately. So you can't come in just like, I'm going to change everything here and expect that the leaders are going to just like accept it off the bat. So they're quite politically skilled in the way they proffer these things. And they talk a lot about navigating risks and gaining rewards. And sometimes they have to pick a longer term, slower growth strategy than a quick win. Okay, perfect. That's all that's in the chat. I know I've gone over time, so I don't want to hold you up here, Michelle.
You're good. Thank you, Katina. That was excellent.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. These are great questions and comments.
Thank you. Great. Awesome. So we will now be shifting gears a bit to next our panel of our Corporate Champions of Change honorees to hear more about how each of these companies journeys from their idea to action, and I bet have really implemented a lot of the behaviors and strategies that Katina talked about. And also just to hear more about what they've learned along their way as well. So I am pleased to introduce Stephanie Nolan-Deviney, a partner at Fox Rothschild, Maureen Hunter, a leader in employee experience and diversity and inclusion at West Pharmaceuticals, Lauren Rinaldi, president and CFO at First Resource Bank, Colleen Stratton, a global leader in workforce development at SEI, and Patty Diggin, our moderator of this conversation. And Patty's also a board member of the fund and the director of the Cottrell Entrepreneurship Center at Westchester University. You can learn more about each of these amazing ladies on the biography handout that Maeve placed in the chat. And so with no further ado, I will turn it over to Patty.
Thank you, Michelle, and good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here to work with this panel of really great women. So I'd like to open up our discussion this morning with a first question that's a look at the philosophy of each of the companies that you work for. Each of the companies you represent have built a reputation of being leaders when it comes to including the voices of women and experiences at your table. How did that come to be? Stephanie, you want to take the first shot at that question?
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today. I think there's one word that comes to my mind when we're talking about, the philosophy at Fox Rothschild, and that is deliberate. I think that, when I joined the firm, I've been there, it'll be 14 years ago in June, I was the 5th woman to join our office. At the time, we had approximately 24 attorneys. Today, we now have 16 women attorneys, although the office has grown to about 44 attorneys. I think the number of women has grown exponentially. In addition, I was only the 2nd mom joining the group, and now we have 8 moms and one mom to be. And I think just from a sort of an overall perspective, when I joined Fox Rothschild, although we had a women's initiative, that initiative initially was sort of a way for women to get together, to share their experiences, to network. And I think through that networking and sharing of experiences, we realized that we really needed to have a seat at the table. And if we needed to make change in the organization, we really needed it from the top down. And so from that standpoint, the women's initiative sort of shifted gears and became more of an advocacy group. And we switched to having 3 separate parts of the women's initiative, one being the leadership committee, which essentially attempts to get more women into leadership roles in Fox Rothschild. The other is having a connectivity group, which is to allow women to connect with one another, to share their experiences, to try and network, to try and cross-market. And the other, which I think is really important, is an associate steering committee. We recognize that, we haven't always had great women leaders that help us as we've come up in our professions. And we really wanted to provide that to the younger women associates in our office, and to also give them the opportunity to have leadership roles. So one of the things that we do is we partner with young women attorneys who are coming up through the ranks for partnership, and we guide them and mentor them through that journey, which is a several-year-long journey at Fox Rothschild, so that we put them in the best position to enable them to make partner. And I'm really happy to say that we've made great strides. We have, in looking at the leadership of our firm, we now, if you look at our C-suite, we have 8, C groups in our management, 3 of whom are women. Our chief talent officers are women, our chief business development and marketing officer is a woman, and our chief knowledge management officer is a woman. And I just think that it really comes from, as Katina talked about, the top down. In addition, in terms of leadership in Fox Rothschild, we also have office managing partners and department leaders, which gives women the opportunity to have a leadership role in the firm. And just this week, actually, there was an announcement as to new office managing partners that had been appointed. 3 out of the 6 new office managing partners were women. Out of the department chairs, 6 There were again 6 named, 2 were women. And I just think that allowing women to have leadership roles has been great. And I think that has come from our women's initiative group, but we would not be successful if we did not have people at the top of our organizations that buy into the idea that your business will run better if you have more diversity and if you give women a seat at the table. And I think our firm has been deliberate in that. Our women's initiative has been in that. And I think the reality is that has led to better policies for women, happier women, and an overall better business environment to work in.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie, for starting us off. Lots of action there at Fox Rothschild for sure. Deliberate, as Katrina was saying. Maureen, you want to share with us some of the philosophies and activities at West Pharmaceutical?
Sure, certainly. And I'm really pleased to be here representing West and also being amongst this group of women talking about the experiences of our organization. So West is a global company. We are just north of 9,000 people. And so as you can imagine, the complexities around how are we creating this environment where women can thrive, where people of color can thrive, where everyone can and thrive and be their best is certainly a challenge. And so I think for us, what it all goes back to is really our core values, because values influence who we are and the ways in which we act and behave. And it's also oftentimes becomes, a point of learning as we wrestle with what is or is not consistent with our values. And so being a global organization, one of our core values is we call One West. And that's, I think, for me, a bellwether that allows us to really navigate the differences and similarities. And we do define diversity as both the differences and the similarities that bring us together. And so it is in how we then, as a community that belong to this organization, how do we navigate? And I would say that we're certainly work in progress, like many organizations. And we also have had some gains that we really are proud of. So for example, in 2018, when we were recognized, our executive team and board of directors were about 20% women. We are now closer to 30%. So I think that for us is an acknowledgement. As Stephanie talked about in terms of her organization, in our organization, our Women Initiative, similar names, Women's Initiative Network, or WIN, has a profound impact in terms of giving visibility, giving access, giving opportunities for learning and development, but also because all of our EBRGs have senior team sponsors, it also creates that connectivity where senior leaders have an opportunity to be involved as well. We can look at our philanthropic efforts where being able to support organizations such as this one that's sponsoring this event in helping to develop our pipeline of talent and in our communities so that we can prepare for having the talent pool that we want to be able to access. Looking at, I think as Dr. Sawyer mentioned, looking at our outreach and who are we helping to develop relationships with so people will see us as a viable employer. And they will say, oh, West, that's a place that I would really like to work, as well as doing the internal work to make sure that people do have a fair shot when they do come in our doors and they want to apply for a position. So a lot of these are the areas that we're working on. I would say one of the things that really helps us and makes us successful is the commitment that we have on our senior leadership team to really drive and be educated on areas where they need to have a deeper understanding of the challenges and the opportunities and what it means, as well as creating those opportunities for our employees to be involved and visible and have a voice. So I think those are some of the things I'd like to share at this point.
Great. Thank you, Maureen. We'll have a chance to dig a little deeper in those as we continue our discussion. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and head over to Lauren there so we can talk about a company that's a much different size than some of these other organizations here. And I think it's important to include that voice at this table as well. So Lauren, can you take away and talk about First Resource?
Sure thing. Thanks, Patty, and thanks for having me today. I certainly bring a different perspective to the table. I run a small business with only 55 employees that happens to be a bank. When it comes to valuing women in the workplace, This was the case from day one. As one of the founding members of the bank, there was always a seat for women at the table, and that philosophy is really ingrained in our culture. It's encouraging that so many companies are identifying opportunities for growth and are making a change for the better. Our philosophy is simple: do the right thing every day of the week. It's the golden rule. This includes creating opportunities for women to excel at work. It sounds easy, but actions truly speak louder than words. If someone expresses an interest in learning about a different part of the company, we invite them to meet with leaders in that area. They've got access to everyone, and we invite them to attend meetings as a guest to foster their real life on the job learning. This happens all the time. It's part of our culture. We have one of the most family-friendly work environments that I have ever seen. This did not happen by accident. It is intentional. We work very hard, but we have a very flexible approach to work-life balance. And boy, did the past year test those limits like nothing ever before, particularly for women. Dealing with closed schools, kids learning at home on Zoom, all the while trying to work yourself all day, it was really very challenging for women in particular. And we worked really hard to make sure that this would work, that people could keep working while all the additional responsibilities at home. As president of the bank, I will leave in the middle of the day to go catch my son's basketball game, take my daughter to our doctor's appointment. The employees see me do that. I don't expect them to not be able to do exactly the same thing. I encourage my team to be there for their families in the same way. Setting the tone at the top is critical to get buy-in throughout every layer of the organization. We're small, we don't have the resources that the big companies have, but being small keeps us nimble, and you don't need to work for an entire, a huge company to be able to have a great philosophy and have a great structure to support women. I'm going to get into some interesting stats later, but I'm really happy to be here today. So thanks, Patty.
Great, thanks very much, Lauren. We're going to round out this opening part of our discussion this morning with Colleen Stratton from SEI, and she's going to share with us some of the philosophy at SEI with regard to women in the workplace. Colleen.
Thanks, Patty, and thank you so much for having me on the panel. So we really look at diversity as a business imperative at SEI. It's part of what has made us successful and helped us thrive through the 50 plus years of our existence. It's really important that we constantly innovate, and we believe that the best innovation comes from putting people at a table that think differently. And so, that has changed over time, how we actually look at diversity in the workplace, but the actual element of making sure that you have people who think differently come together and work on problems has not changed since 1968 for our organization. I'm going to tiptoe into your next question, if that's okay, Patty, but part of what I wanted to talk about is that 2017 was a catalyst year for us. So 2017, we all know, was the Me Too movement. It was really the intersection of the Me Too movement and the gender pay initiative that we had in our UK office. And that really put a spotlight on women in particular in the workforce for us. And so we started a bunch of campaigns to really say, are we doing what we can to make sure that women have a seat at the table as much and as frequently as we would like them to within the organization? Always like to say it takes a village to raise anything, right? So we put together a village, we put together some of the most senior women at the company, and we founded a campaign that was called the Get, Grow, Keep campaign. And this was around recruiting, retaining, and developing women within the organization. But we realized as we did that we really had to start somewhere. And so where we started was part of what Katina was talking about, was like, we need to think about the business case, and we need to be able to influence and change people at the very top of the organization. So we started with gathering a lot of data and putting together actually a dashboard of where women were within the organization. So we looked at things like our external candidate pool, our internal candidate pool. We looked at promotions, we looked at people leaving the organization, and we looked at people, just a general movement within the organization. And from that, we were able to determine a couple of inflection points. Two of them were really common to everybody, but one of them was unique to women. So the two that were common to everybody were at year 2 and year 5. We had people leaving the organization at those years, and they were for all different reasons, but the year 5 one was particularly painful. But what we saw in our women was that we had women self-selecting out of the interview process, moving from the supervisor level to the manager level. They either left the company or they decided not to get up to that next level. And so we took that on as a particular initiative to say what is going on there and how can we look to change that, because we want to get more women into the most senior levels of the organization. And in order to do that, we really have to have a feeder pool at the manager level and the supervisor level. So I'm sure we'll talk about it in subsequent discussion, but we've done a lot of work in that area to say, how can we continue to make sure that women are getting promoted up within the organization? A lot of the focus that people want to look at, which we always do as well, is the recruiting pool, but we also want to make sure that we're looking at the internal pool just as strongly as we are the external pool.
Awesome. Thank you for kicking that part off for us, Colleen. So I want to get a little bit deeper into the actual actions that are taking place at each of your organizations. I know some of you have shared portions of those in your opening comments here, but for this next, I'd like to kind of look at this where rubber meets the road, where the real action takes place, right? So bringing it down a little bit more. And I'm going to start with you, Maureen, because in looking at your bio, it says that you're currently working with West Pharmaceutical Services on developing and executing a strategy encompassing employee experience, diversity, and inclusion. So can you give us some of those specific actions, just as Katrina mentioned in her comments? You know, it's nice to say those things, but how are you actually putting them into place?
Thank you so much. My favorite question. So thank you. So I'm really excited about this idea of being able to blend employee experience and diversity and inclusion together. If we think about, if we have like 9,500 employees, we've got 9,500 employee experiences that shift day to day to day. And so how can we make sure that people who are part of our community, as they go about their days and do the work where they're committing and contributing so much of themselves to the success of this organization, how can they feel that they're being valued? How can they feel recognized? How can they feel that they have opportunities? And so that's, I think, in blending those ideas of employee experience and diversity inclusion, those are some of the opportunities that we have. And so some of the ways that we're going to look at that is, one is going to, we're calling the moments that matter. So kind of going, rather than going to a macro level, we go to a micro level. And we want to identify what are specific moments through the course of an employee's journey throughout West, from the point in time when they become aware of us to the time that they leave for whatever reason. What are the moments to them that say, this is a positive place for me. This is a place that I want to be. This is an organization where I feel that I can be at my best. And if we can define what those moments are, then I think we can deconstruct them to find out what is it that makes those moments successful. So for example, I think one of the classic moments is getting and receiving feedback and giving feedback, which we all know is really critical to advancement and to improving in terms of performance as well as development. We also know that women and people of color are more likely to say that they do not receive constructive, substantive feedback. And we know that managers sometimes feel uncomfortable giving direct feedback to women and people of color because they don't want to be misperceived. So how can we take that one moment and look at it from both the employee's perspective, from the manager's perspective, and then help it to upskill both of them so that they can really have a substantive interaction that works for all of our West employees, you know, given their diversity, their gender, and all those other dimensions that are going to come into play. So that is a key critical part, one of the ways in which we want to be able to advance our idea of employee experience and diversity inclusion through employee experience. Certainly, I think there's other things that we want to do around developing leaders and looking at critical roles within our organization where there are issues with either as we look at the incumbents within that particular role and we don't see the diversity that we think should be there, as we look at the talent pipeline for those roles and we don't see the diversity that we can be there, is how can we intervene and really do a targeted, focused effort of thinking about how we can both groom and develop and accelerate the development of people within the organization who can be, you know, viable candidates for those roles, either 1 or 2 or 3 jobs away. At the same time, how can we also be clear around where we have opportunities to bring in talent to the organization to fill those gaps? We're going through a process of looking at many of our critical positions through the lens of what makes somebody successful in this role and what are the key criteria to be successful in this role. And it kind of gets to what Dr. Sawyer talked about earlier around really focusing on the behaviors and what is it that someone needs to do. And then how can we both upskill people who are currently in the role and a part of that would be how can they be more inclusive leaders and managers, as well as preparing people who we want to see in the pipeline for those roles and making sure that it is as diverse as it possibly can. So those are just a few of the ways that we're thinking about bringing this to life.
Great. Thanks very much, Maureen, for adding that for us this morning. So I'm going to go back to you, Stephanie. You talked a lot about, I think the Women's Initiative is the program that you were focusing on. Can you give us a little, an idea of how that went from an idea to an action? When that all started, what was what was the impetus for that? What got that going?
Yeah, so I joined the firm in 2007, so about 14 years ago. And I do recall it was probably, we were winning awards at that time, for top 50 women, top 50 law firms for working mothers from Working Mother magazine. But I think that there was just a little bit of discontentment of, well, we don't have to do more, we need women leaders at the top. And in looking at our top at that point in time, there were not a lot of women leaders, and there were not a lot of either in the C-suite or in the department chair heads or practice chair heads. And so there was sort of a core group of the Women's Initiative that went, and in 2007, we were much smaller. We had 7 offices. Now we have 22 offices coast to coast. Back then we were probably less than 500 attorneys. Now we're, almost to 1,000 attorneys. So the firm has grown, but I think we managed to approach the leaders of our firm, the chair of the firm, and say to them, look, the firm will benefit if there are more women leaders. How can we work together to get there? And that's when the different policies and philosophies came up about, making the Women's Initiative more concrete, more action oriented. And we came up with the 3 different buckets, 3 different committees. And I do think that we started to get buy-in from everyone, realizing that, yes, this actually is a good thing for our firm. And it's been great because over the years, I've seen so many policies change for the better when it comes to women working in the workplace. One of those policies is surrounding, I think when I started in 2007, it was, you had 12 weeks of, pregnancy leave. Well, now it's completely changed and we have a 6-month, and it's now parental leave. And it really has nothing to do with whether you were pregnant or not. And it is for both men and women. And everything has evolved. We've added more time to parental leave. We've expanded who qualifies for it. But we realized that that's just not enough because practically in the workplace, you are working at a certain point of time and then you go off on your leave and come back. And in speaking and listening to people that were out on these leaves, we found out that there was a lot of, although grateful for these leaves, there was a lot of feeling of pressure before the leave of, oh my goodness, I have all this stuff to do. And people not giving you work because they didn't really want to give you work because you were leaving. And this sort of, you come back into the office, are adjusting to everything. And some people might not want to overload you. Some people have their own biases that now, maybe you're not going to be committed and you're suddenly not getting as much work as you used to get or should get, because in a law firm, we do have a billable hour requirement. So to the firm's credit, they then implemented another policy which allows for sort of a ramp down and ramp up, going into your paternal leave and coming out of it and coming back in coming out of your paternal leave back into the workforce, so that you're not expected to, even though technically at the end of the day, that's the there's a certain number that of hours you're supposed to bill. We're now prorating that, understanding that this is a big deal in life, and to have an effective workplace and to have people that want to continue to work there, you need to listen and you need to understand what are the challenges that are facing people and women in the workplace. So that's a policy I just think is fantastic. And I love seeing people take advantage of it. We've also seen so many more, spaces that are available, for women who may be breastfeeding or needing to do, need some just downtime. And also through this pandemic, we have, I think it was everybody, as I'm sure can attest, that there was such a shift of, oh my goodness, what do we do? And so many people with young children were, oh my goodness, what do I do? And our firm stepped up and tried to come up with a solution. And we now have a program, Wellthy, WELLTHY, that is a resource that's available to help you find childcare, to help you find elder care for your parents, to help you maybe get the resources that you need, through any kind of therapy or things. So I think it's been really great that our firm, when we talk about the rubber meeting the road, is that we have these policies. Not only do we implement them, but we continue to look at them and evaluate them and see, are they working? Are there ways to improve them? And we also, another great program that we participate is the on-ramp, which is for women that have taken time, stepped out of the law firm life to have kids or for whatever reason, and want to come back. People were afraid to do that. And we participated in a program, it's a nationwide program, where we hire a woman who's been out, who's coming back into the workplace, and allow her the flexibility to rejoin the workplace, where she might otherwise be afraid to enter it or feel like she's lost the skills. And I think we can all attest, technology changes so much that if you're out of the workplace for 5 years and step back in, it's daunting and it's scary. And I'm really proud to be part of a firm that recognizes that and participates in such a great program.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie, for all those wonderful details. I do want to encourage everyone. I see a few people are now putting some comments in the chat. Feel free to throw in any questions that you might have. If there's any follow-ons that you want for our panelists here. This panel will be with you until 10:15 actually. So there's plenty of time to dive deeper into something if there's something that resonates with you. So Lauren, I'd like to turn it back over to you. And let's go back to the very beginning of First Resource, because really the bank isn't that old, right? And I believe you started it with Glenn, if that is correct. Mm-hmm. So maybe give us a little sense of, it sounds like the strategy to have women engaged in the bank was from the get-go. So kind of give us a feeling of how that all came about.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. It's such an honor to be on this panel and to be recognized as a corporate champion of change. We don't really think we're doing anything all that special. As a matter of fact, I had to be nudged a few times to even apply for this award, because we're just being us, right? So it's hard for me to identify a lot of specific programs or things that we're doing, because it's in our nature. And we have a line we use around here where it's culture is everything. And when we opened the bank 16 years ago, Glenn and I started the bank together, and he's been my partner in crime here at the bank. And I told him at the time, I had a 1-year-old. That was crazy. I'm going to go open a bank. I mean, my parents thought I was insane. I luckily had a nice support system at home that let me take that risk. But I had a 1-year-old at home, and I told him before we even started this, I'm going to have another child, know this going in. And he was incredibly supportive and was like, that's great. When you would have 10 kids, we'll make it work. And having a business partner like that was really everything. We're only 16 years old, and we see that as a really big advantage. When you're doing things right from the get-go, you don't necessarily need a lot of plans or programs to change things. What you need is a plan to keep the momentum going. And we do this in a few ways. First, we put a major emphasis on hiring the right people. I am fiercely protective of our culture. We have something really special going on here. We recognize it, and we don't want to jeopardize it as we grow. When we opened in 2005, we had only 11 employees, believe it or not, running a bank with following the same regulations as Bank of America, banks that have tens of thousands of employees. We've grown to 55. So at 5 times the size, how do we not lose the secret sauce? Well, I interview every single employee that we're considering hiring here, whether they're sweeping the floors or they're the president of the bank. Every single person has to fit the culture, because I can train you to be a banker, but I can't train you to be a decent human being. And it's really one of the fundamental things that has really helped us continue to have a culture that is inclusive and that is just a nice place to work, which is how you get longevity in employees and help people grow in their career paths. What's unique about First Resource Bank is that 4 out of 6 members of our senior management team are women. That's 60%. That is incredibly rare in a bank. That's myself. I'm president and CFO, my chief lending officer, my chief operating officer, and my chief retail officer. So 4 out of 6 seats at that weekly management meeting are women at the table. And the other thing that's really cool about it is that the 4 of us that are at that table have never held those positions before in a prior job. So not only do we have women at the table, but we've created opportunities for those women at the table that they maybe never would have had if had they been someplace else in their career. So with mentoring and training, we all stepped up to the challenge, and I include myself in that group of 4. I was never CFO before, I was never president before, and now here 16 years in, I have a thriving, growing bank that is creating opportunities for other women. So it's been really a tremendous experience, and that mentoring we've identified as a strength of ours, where we welcome people to the table, whether they want to learn, whether I have someone in the branch that wants to learn more about lending, well, go to lunch with the chief lending officer. And that open door policy has really helped people explore. I've had people start as a teller and now they're in the loan department, starting as a teller, now they're in accounting. So creating those opportunities to pursue different interests has been really advantageous for the employees and, quite honestly, the bank. The more well-rounded they are, the better the banker that they are. We know that we are not perfect, no company is, and we often seek feedback as to things that we can do better. We do open forum Q&As, now they're on Zoom, but over the past year, and we, open up, they can ask anything to us and in that open forum, which is, I think, scary for some companies, but we welcome the feedback and the questions. And it's been a great way to kind of self-correct as we've gone through. The past year, we've all been navigating the new normal, and things have been turned on their heads, and being able to adapt to that. It's obviously easier as a small company with only 55 employees, but little things that you can change in any company really can make a big difference in one person's life. So yeah, it's been the design since day one. But we're fiercely trying to continue that momentum, and that's a challenge for us going forward, but we're very focused on it.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Great perspective. So I want to stay in that theme of strategy, Colleen, and turn it back over to you, because one of your first opening comments last time was that having equity and inclusion, and particularly women that we're focusing on here, built into your strategy. So it's built into the strategy of SEI. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so what I was talking about with that, Patty, was that we believe that innovation comes from diverse thought, and diverse thought comes from people sitting around a table who think differently. And so we have always positioned ourselves to have people who think differently at the table. And that can be, I love a lot of what Lauren was saying. We've had a lot of success in bringing people that are not from the financial industry to participate in conversations because they think differently. I remember being at an offsite for a leadership team, and And at our table, we had a real estate agent come and sit. And the real estate agent just started asking us questions about how we came up with our recommendation. And they just looked at the world so differently than the people that were sitting around the table. And I found that so incredibly valuable. And so I think, making sure that you have that diversity of thought, and, in the 2020 for all of us, I'm sure on this call, was just a unique year. But in 2020, making sure that we had that diverse thought constantly present and making sure that we're making decisions with that voice in mind has been incredibly important to us. We have great affinity groups at SEI. I'm really proud of especially the SEI Women's Network, and they have really stepped up over the last year and helped us make decisions around a lot, like what Stephanie was talking about. How do we help parents manage being a teacher and a full-time employee? The year of COVID has really taught all of us so many lessons and proved how important it is to have affinity groups within your organizations and have those groups come forward and help you make a lot of these decisions. There were a couple other programs, Patty, if it's okay, that I wanted to just call out that we look at SEI. The SEI Women's Network, I'm really proud of something that they've launched, which is our Emerging Leaders Program, which is making sure that we have college and high school aged girls come on campus and learn a little bit about what it's like to have careers in STEM. We have a neurodiversity program at work that we've had in motion, I think, for close to 4 or 5 years now, and it's doing incredibly well. Again, also putting together people who think differently. And Stephanie talked a little bit about it. We don't call it on-ramping, we call them returnships. And I would say that it's not just stay-at-home moms, but it's women, men, military, anybody who has had an absence from the actual their working career and need to transition back into. And so, like, even on my HR team, I've hired 3 return to work moms and had incredible experiences with all of them. And it's like, what's the value add of people coming into your organization? And then one of the things that's very tactical that we did, so remember when I talked about the Get, Grow, Keep campaign, I said that we saw that we had women falling off from the supervisor level to the manager level. Well, when I went into that program, we really thought it was going to be an external recruiting experience, like how are we going to get more candidates into the recruiting pool? And what we learned from that was that it was just as important for us to focus on the internal recruiting. And so we recently launched a program that's called Sei Pathways. And we all know the statistics where it says a man can feel 40% qualified and he'll apply for a job, and a woman needs to feel 80 or 90% qualified to apply for a job. Well, we've embedded artificial intelligence in our Sei Pathways so that it will push jobs to women in particular. It doesn't, and I turned off the function of how qualified are you for the job, because I don't want women to not feel that they're qualified enough for the job, but they can proactively get jobs coming to them so that it'll actually suggest career paths for you within the organization. That's just really launched at the beginning of this. We launched it in November, and the artificial intelligence needs to learn from itself if you're familiar with those systems, but we're really optimistic that that's going to help us have women within the organization applying for more senior positions.
Pretty amazing stuff. Excuse me, my phone is ringing here. Some pretty amazing stuff that everyone's been sharing with us. It's really great. And I do see there's a couple of questions in the chat. Is there anything else before I move off this rubber to the road? Is there any other program or policy that I may have missed from any of your organizations? If so, you can unmute, or we'll move on to some of the other questions that we want to cover this morning before we wrap up this session.
Yeah, I'd say one quick thing that I'd like to cover is we certainly have had, as I mentioned, our Women's Initiative Network, or WIN, for a period of time, looking at launching. We launched 2 other EBRGs, and then unfortunately because of COVID, we have to relaunch. But the other thing that we are really starting this year is launching a CEO-led inclusion council. And on some level we say, well, why didn't we do that before? But what we really find is the voice of leadership and the modeling of leadership and their ability to really demonstrate this is important, and we have our eye on this, and we care about this, and we're going to be very active. I think is such an important component of sending those messages throughout the organization, and so that's one of the areas that we're also going to be focusing on this year.
Great, thank you. I have one question that actually is for Lauren as a small organization, but if anyone else has a follow-on after Lauren responds that you'd like to add, that's great as well. So as a small institution, does First Resource seek to achieve racial and ethnic diversity as well in their senior positions?
Yeah, it's a good question. Certainly that is our goal. So we have 2 challenges to that, and we acknowledge that that's something that we need to work on. One of the challenges is that I don't have a lot of turnover. So I don't have a lot of openings. I've had, if my bank is 16 years old, I probably have 10 people who have already had 15-year anniversaries, which is a testimony to the culture that we don't have a lot of turnover, but it also doesn't create a ton of opportunities at the top for new recruitment there. And one of the other challenges is that we struggle with getting a diverse applicant pool. So one of the projects that we're looking at internally is recruiting from different sources and being more intentional about where we're trying to recruit new talent. It's been something we haven't used the headhunter route much, but we may need to go that route. And financially, it hasn't really been in our budget to do that, but it's certainly something that's on our radar. So I appreciate the question.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I would just add, Patty, that I think, and Lauren, I'm very optimistic. I mean, the way that we look at work has changed through COVID, and that so many of us went remote. And so I am optimistic that we are now not as limited to our geographical areas. And so I'm hopeful that that will help us with recruiting and being able to recruit more diverse candidates internally and externally.
Great, thank you, Colleen. So let's have our final section here and talk about a few questions. I think, Maureen, this first one we were going to field to you. How do you get others to buy into your approach, and how do you shift the culture? What tools do you use to maintain engagement beyond one-off programs?
Yeah, and so part of it I mentioned in terms of the CEO Inclusion Council. And so, it happens to be, for change to happen, it has to be continuous. Too often what happens is we will launch something, there'll be a lot of energy, and then over time, because other things encroach, or we get busy, or our focus changes, or we have crises like COVID that pops up, and so then that focused attention then dissipates, and it begins to sink in people's memories, or it slips to the back burner. And so for us, it's how do we keep it front and center? And so one of the ways we're doing that is really to have a comprehensive communication strategy, so that we're continually thinking about how do we refresh, how do we revitalize the message, and taking advantage of the tools that we have. So for example, we have we call it InterWest, it's our internal communications platform, and information platform. And so we're continually looking at how can we utilize that, and also do things through that platform where it's much more interactive. So as opposed to kind of a one-dimensional, one-directional sharing of information, it's Black History Month, so let's just push some information out to you. How can we also make it interactive and dynamic, so that people have an opportunity to contribute? And so for us, because as I said earlier, our value is around One West, one of the things that we really are trying to drive home through our communication strategy is that idea of One West, where it is all of us. It is about us learning about each other. It is about us having conversations with each other and talking to each other and sharing who we are. So I think people are naturally curious. So having that as a platform is one way that we keep it front and center. Another thing that really becomes important, particularly from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, is data. And are you really tracking information? Are you diving into the organization to see where are those problems and challenges, as well as where are your strengths and opportunities? So for example, as we look back at the last time we did an employee experience survey was in 2017, and which is why we're relaunching again this year. And one of the things that was really fascinating to see is, and one of the more positive areas on that survey was people's sentiments about diversity and where they thought the organization was. And so that's important information for us to be able to say that there is some degree of a natural affinity. So how do we continue to capture that and engage that and keep that going, both through communications as well as the things that we want to do around education? I think that one of the things that we are probably doing less of is kind of generalized unconscious bias or diversity training. It's there, but I think what we do want to emphasize more, as I talked about earlier, is how do you embed that in the moments that matter? So it's almost like bringing it to where people are in their day-to-day jobs, and how do you kind of make it alive at that level of the organization so that they see that we are committed, and they also see that they have a voice, and they see that we're growing, and that we see that we're trying to get better as well. So I think it's also being willing to kind of experiment and try new things as well. We're focusing on a lot on high performing teams. And what does it mean to be a high performing team? And one of the critical aspects or elements of a high performing team is its diversity and its ability to engage diversity of thought. So I think it's a lot of these different ways and things that we're doing that we're trying to keep this idea alive and very much relevant to what people do on in their day-to-day lives.
Great, thanks, Maureen. So one for you, Stephanie. How do you move people along in the journey when you feel they may feel personally threatened by the outcome?
Well, I think it's trying to understand why they feel threatened. You know, everyone brings their own journey. You know, as Maureen said, with, you know, you have 9,000, 8,000 people, everybody has their own journey and experience. I think it's important to realize and understand, and at least try to understand, why would someone feel threatened by this? I mean, so many times we can sit back and say, well, this, you know, I can say as a woman, well, it's so great to have this opportunity and this extra time, you know, when you're out on maternity leave or coming back. And I think it's just trying to teach and to explain to people, you know, number one, it's understanding why they feel threatened. Number two, sort of acknowledging that. Number three, explaining to them the reason behind the policy. And if you have results of it already, sharing those positive outcomes with people, because I think that by doing that, you can helpfully, you know, make them feel recognized and understood, but also try and move the needle and get them to buy in with you and to understand that while this, you know, nobody likes, a lot of people don't like change. I won't say nobody, because sometimes people do like change. A lot of people find change hard. And so I think you have to just acknowledge that and try and get people to buy in and be on your team and to see the benefits of these policies and changes to benefit not just the group of people that are, you know, immediately benefiting from the policy, but how your company as a whole is going to benefit from it.
Great, thank you. So as we get towards the end of this segment, I'd like to get a little bit more personal here. And this might be a question that all of you can field. And I'm going to start with Colleen. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the mistakes that you may have made along the way and some of the lessons that you've learned through those years, and what the impact has been on the organization, perhaps?
Sure, absolutely, Patty. So one of the assumptions that I made at the beginning in 2018, when we said that we were going to try to get more women into leadership roles, was that we said for every senior leadership role that we're going to have, let's make sure we have one woman on interview for that job. And then I think it was 6 months later, I read the Harvard Business School study that says when you have one of anything, it makes them a target for all the reasons why they're not a good fit for that job. So we have adjusted that and said, let's not have the goal of one woman or minority interviewing for a senior level role, but instead at least two. And so that was a lesson that we learned. The other thing I learned is that we can talk about the things that we need to do. Like, for example, we talk about unbundling the recruiting process and making sure that we don't do culture fit until the end of the recruiting process. And instead we do technical fit at the beginning. And we can talk about that we need to have a diverse interview team for every single position that we interview for. But when the rubber meets the road and people are really busy, it's really hard for them to remember that they have to include that diverse person in the interview team, or they have to make sure that they're following the proper process. So just because we say we're going to do it, it doesn't necessarily mean it makes it all the way down. And it doesn't necessarily mean that when people are especially in the last year, as overly busy as they are, that they're going to remember that they have to take that into account. You have to constantly reinforce it and make sure that people are following through with what you say you're going to do.
Great, thank you. So Lauren, I'd like you to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced personally and how you responded to those challenges.
Sure, I'm a big believer in you learn a lot from seeing people do the wrong thing. I like watching other people make mistakes and then making sure that I do the opposite. So over my career, I've had the stereotypical horrible female role model. When I was first out of college, I literally was working for someone who forgot to pick up their child from daycare at the end of the day. I was like, this is never going to be me. This is never going to be me. And it's not me. But learning about priorities, right? You can totally kick butt at work and you can totally kick butt at home, and they might not always be on the same day, but in general, it kind of all evens out. When I was first starting out as a working mother, I had a 1-year-old daughter who was sick all the time. That poor girl, her ears were clogged nonstop. She couldn't walk. She was so messed up. Just being in daycare, right? It's what happens. We've all been through it. But every time I had to go to my boss and say, I got to go to daycare to go pick up my daughter, it was not welcome. And it made me feel like I was a horrible employee and a horrible mother. And there were points where I thought, what am I doing here? And incidentally, that daughter was a GAB girl. Shout out to the GAB program. That was tremendous. But she can walk now and is quite a young, strong female. So that's exciting. But anyway, my point was having that employer that's not understanding that people have a life outside work and responsibilities outside work. I was shocked at, this is 2004 and this is what I'm dealing. This isn't 1950. And you don't forget those lessons. Even earlier on in my career, I was requesting an early promotion, and it was a very regimented track. You were a first year, you were a second year, then you were this, then you were that. And they were putting me in proposals as a manager. And I said, I'm not a manager, so I think I should be a manager. And they told me, we can't do that. And then one of my male peers got that promotion early. And I was done. I left. I am very intolerant of an environment like that. So I left that job. I left the other job with the boss that wasn't good with my sick kid. And, I took a huge leap and started my own company. So it was a huge risk, but that's how I responded, because I can't work for people I don't respect. And I created my own culture, but you don't need to do the huge thing like I did. I think too often we still see women not supporting women in the workplace. That costs nothing. That's free to just create an environment where we're supporting each other with whatever we have going on, whether it's a sick parent or a nonprofit that you're involved in, that you're trying to get through some challenges, or you're raising kids. There's ways that we can all work better together to support each other, individually succeed, and then the company succeeds better as well. So I like to learn from other people's mistakes, and I like to think I'm not repeating the things that I was horrified by early in my career.
Great, thanks, Lauren.
Mm-hmm.
So Maureen and Stephanie, any final thoughts from you on your personal side, or mistakes or lessons learned as we wrap up this session?
I would say for me, patience is probably been, and sometimes checking myself, because I've been having conversations within organizations around diversity for about 30 years now, 30 plus. And so there's a part of me that says, we should have been further along by now. And why are we still having the same conversations that we've been having? And so for me, it is then kind of stepping myself back and saying, people are where they are. And you have to kind of start with where they are and help to then move the needle and the thinking and the mindset forward. And so for me, that is just kind of keeping the long game in mind and understanding that, like any change, particularly change, I think diversity is a little bit different because it does really require you to do some internal work and challenging, what you think, what you believe, what your own actions, what your own behaviors, the kind of impact that you might be having. And so that just takes time. And so for me, I would say patience.
I would just, say I feel so lucky and so blessed that, I've since graduating from law school in 1997, I've only had 2 employers, both of which have had wonderful philosophies, wonderful attitudes towards women in the workplace. And I think, you always have your one-offs, but, I don't know whether it's just my philosophy and sort of my attitude that landed me in the right places. But I think, as Lauren said, I don't think I would have been able to, put up with a place that had such, horrendous attitudes. I don't think that's not my personality. I'm a very positive person. I like to surround myself with people that, sort of feel the same way, that are, open to change. And I feel really, really lucky to be in places, and was very happy in my last job. And I'll never forget, my mother said to me, my son was 2 and I was going from part-time work to a full-time position at Fox. And I remember my mother saying to you, I hope you're as happy a year from now as you are now. As you know, only an Irish mother could, you know, put the guilt on you. And, you know, here I am 14 years later and absolutely just so happy with my decision. And I really hope for everyone that they find that place for them that, you know, supports them and, you know, nurtures them and is open to change to help their organizations grow and to become better.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephanie. And thank you to all of our panelists here this morning, Stephanie, Lauren, Colleen, and Maureen. I hope that everyone has enjoyed learning more about what their companies do to support women in the workplace and also diversity in general in the workplace. I think it was a really great follow-on to our opening speaker, and I look forward to hearing from our Gladys Black Award winners a little bit later on this morning. So I'll turn it back over to you, Michelle or Brandon, or who's ever going to facilitate the next, the breakout sessions. And thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Patty. That was wonderful. A lot of things to chew on, and great timing in terms of going right into a networking through breakout rooms, or just a break if that's what you need, just some time to process the information we already heard, you know, with each other in the groups or in the breakout sessions, or, you know, again, just as if you need a time to stretch, take a break from the screen, use the bathroom, or do whatever you need to do. So Brandon will be placing everyone or giving the invitation to join a breakout room if you're so inclined. And we will be doing that for the next 20 minutes or so. And then we'll come back together around 10:45 for the next panel. So see you back in about 20 minutes or so. We're going to jump right back into the program for this conversation among our Gladys Black Women of Distinction honorees. So for those of you who don't know, this award is named in memory of the fund's late friend and committed board member, Gladys Black. Gladys was a business leader, and after the death of her husband, she became acting president of the Valley Forge Group, which comprised of companies in the US, Germany, and England. She was an active and engaged supporter of her church, her alma mater, and a number of organizations and nonprofits. It's really the same commitment and drive to empower women that Gladys had that led us to recognizing each of the honorees that you'll have a chance to hear from today. So with no further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce Patricia Miller, an operations executive and board director, Roberta Torian, a financial services counsel and principal at Seneca Global Strategies, Dr. Lori Bernatsky, Executive Vice President and Provost at Westchester University, Charmaine Spence Rochester, the Chief Financial Officer and Senior VP at Chester County Hospital, and Tiffany Scott, who will be our moderator. Tiffany is a board member of the fund, as well as the Director of College Counseling at the Church Farm School. Again, you can refer to the handout that went through the chat to learn more about these ladies. So Tiffany, I will turn it over to you.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Michelle. I am really honored to be amongst these really accomplished women in Chester County. They have done so much for our community and for the places that they represent. So I'm really glad that we get to have this conversation with them. I hope that all of you had a wonderful time in your breakout rooms. I know in our breakout room, we learned so much from one another. And I know it's kind of challenging in these Zoom times to build those connections, but it's definitely a great opportunity for us to gather in this way this Friday morning. So for my panelists, I will start with Patty first, and I hope that all of you will be able to chime in on this question. So each of you obviously are leaders in your workplace and exemplify great leadership in helping to pave the way for other women in the workforce. So you guys are all pretty ambitious already and have had to juggle so much in your career. What inspires you to look out for others when you're balancing so much in your own career?
I guess that's me, right? Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Michelle, and to the fund for including me in this wonderful summit. This morning has been great so far, and I hope we can continue that. I have to say first that I am very envious of anyone that works for the companies or for these ladies that were on the panel this morning. I think some of us would be in a much higher position if we Got to start like that with companies like those. They are making a difference. What inspires me? It's quite simple. I don't want anyone to experience the same barriers that I did in my career. Starting working in the late 60s, things were very different and we wouldn't be even having these conversations. If I can coach, mentor, hire, recruit, develop, and provide opportunities for others, then these are great satisfiers for me. It makes me feel good.
Roberta?
I guess two things for me. And I also say thank you for including me on the panel. I guess that was Michelle's decision, so thank you very much. And thank you to the women this morning who were amazing and very magnanimous in responding to some tough questions, I thought. So kudos to you. Yeah, so one of the things is that I got out of law school in the late 70s. And so my career spans a time when a lot of people on this call were not born, 1978. And what I was able to achieve, I guess, because sort of one-offs, like some person there would help or some person elsewhere, you know, may have known someone. What I've tried to do is to help other women in a consistent way so that it's easier for them to navigate, it's easier for them to find someone that they can get ideas from or share their ambitions with, talk about the road up with, really just to try to make it easier for them. Because for me, it was haphazard and an awful lot of luck, and nobody can count on luck.
Dr. Bernofsky?
Sure. So, you know, I've been really fortunate, and listening to Roberta and Patty, I especially want to recognize that because of the work that I do and being in education and higher education, you know, I've got the opportunity, right, to interface with students, men and women, and faculty and administrators, and in an environment that I think is more open to equity and to inclusion. And, you know, certainly from a very young age, I've had a really strong passion for social justice. And I've been really lucky in my life to be able to be in spaces where I can pursue that, right? So what motivates me, and when I was faculty, by the way, for 15 years before I started in administration, all at Westchester, did some adjuncting work at some other institutions. But, you know, I'm very motivated by the attempt to change the world, right? Even if it's just my little corner of it. And when I was faculty, you know, I taught race, class, and gender theory for a long time. You know, I would think about changing the world, you know, one classroom at a time. And now I think about it as, you know, one institution at a time. And for any of us, right, as you move up in leadership, one organization at a time. And it is amazing, right, when you kind of look back. So that motivates me, and I've thoroughly been able to pursue that, fortunately, in my career path.
Charmaine?
So I just want to echo my appreciation for the program so far today. It certainly has been inspiring listening to the speakers, and it's such a privilege to be here. And I think it's, you know, I have a similar reason for wanting to be a difference maker. And I think it's because others have been difference makers for me. I'm an immigrant. I came here with my mom, who is a nurse, and she had to rely on others. And I think as immigrants, you don't know the rules, and you're trying to figure it out. And were it not for, you know, the help of folks, and sometimes you didn't have help, and you did what you thought was best, and you learn as you went along. But I just think the more we know and the more opportunities that open up to us, we have a responsibility to make sure that we provide that for those who need us to be the difference makers for them.
So Charmaine, you kind of led right into my next question that I have. Is there a particular story or a person that fueled your motivation to help to fuel how you look out for others in your positions?
Yeah, so I mentioned my mom a little bit. You know, because of her sacrifice and the risks that she took, because she wanted to create a better life for us, she created a legacy that I think inspires me with everything I do. And as a mom of girls who are now adult girls, it's interesting that my mom inspired me and now my daughters are inspiring me because, you know, they saw I was always a working mom, and you know, we heard stories earlier how tough it is when you have bosses who don't understand and the sacrifices, and you feel like you're a terrible mom and you're a terrible employee because you're juggling both worlds and you're never doing it great. And I'm on the other end of that now. My girls are grown, but I can tell you when I was going through it, I was also a military wife. So my husband was out. I was a single mom a lot of the time. He was in the Navy, so he'd be off on the ship. And we'd be in a town where I didn't know anybody, so I didn't have a support group. And I was working. I was always a working mom. And I can't tell you, there's so many days where I just felt like I was not a great mom and I wasn't doing all I could at work. And I was just caught in this world. I had a lot of guilt both ways. And I really hope that if there are young moms listening now, they'll take heart in knowing that really what you're doing is you're showing your kids the how to build resilience, because I think that's what they saw. You survive. It's not pretty all the time, but you get past those difficult times. And now my daughters are inspiring me because they've both decided to serve in the military. They both went to the United States Air Force Academy, and they chose routes that were traditionally male dominated, and there are no accommodations made because they're a woman, and they've gone in there and they've held their own. And so when I think about what they're doing, it inspires me to continue moving forward. And I just want to mention that I recently transitioned. So I was at Chester County Hospital as a CFO for a long time. Well, not that long, around 4 years. And I recently had the opportunity to move to Lancaster General, still within the Penn Medicine family as a CFO here. And I can honestly say that my mom and my girls, they inspire me to keep, you know, reaching for that next thing and taking risks and doing the hard thing, because when you do that, you really are creating a pathway for others who can follow.
That's awesome. Thank you for being so open with your answer. Roberta, do you have a comment, a story, or a person that fueled your motivation?
I don't have any hesitation to say that the person who fueled my motivation was my dad. I had a wonderful mother, loved her to death. We were very, very close. But my father, who was an independent businessman, he worked with American Express, but he had his own business in selling, you know, securities and insurance to them. So he was an independent businessman. He thought that it was his obligation in his spare time, this is a man with a business and 4 children, to find time to mentor other small businesses. And he worked with the Chamber of Commerce in, well, we grew up in the suburbs, but the nearest sort of city was New Haven, Connecticut. And he worked with the Chamber of Commerce there to set up a small business, sort of an incubator. And he would go there a couple of evenings a week and work with other people who wanted to start small businesses. And he wasn't paid for that. He wasn't selling them securities. He just thought that he had that obligation. And in most cases, not all, in most cases, they were African-American men who were trying to do it. Because again, you know, this is the 60s and 70s, so you didn't have a lot of women at that point trying to start their own businesses. Although I do recall there were at least 1 or 2 women who did come into the incubator that he worked with. So I grew up seeing somebody who took their own time when they didn't have to help other people who were trying to make a better life for themselves. And so to me, that's kind of, what you're supposed to do.
Thank you, Roberta. Dr. Bernatsky?
Yes, sure. Certainly the person that I think about a lot is Madeline Wing Adler. She was the first woman president of Westchester. That was 3 presidents ago, but she was president at Westchester when I got hired. She was here for 14 years. There were people actively working against her, literally because she was a woman, right? And it's think about that and the role that she played and all she was able to do here. She made a tremendous impact on the borough, on the downtown area, certainly on the university and our faculty and staff and students. So, she's bold, she's courageous, she knew who she was. And she took me under her wing very early on in my career. And I absolutely owe a lot to her and am inspired by her in the work I do now with other women.
Patty?
Well, there's lots of stories to tell and people who pushed me, and some of it was negative. I think early on, Lauren talked about the negative part of your life that you learned from. I was told no, I couldn't play the drums, and I became head drummer. I was told no, I couldn't be a lifeguard, and so I became a really good lifeguard. Only saved 1 life, but that person probably makes a difference for them. And then I realized that no motivated me just so I could prove the naysayers wrong. And my parents especially motivated me, which we're hearing that as a common theme. My father was a truck driver and worked very hard at 2 jobs, so I learned how to work hard. My mother worked hard to make our small house a home. She took great pride in it, so I understood that when you do feel good about something, that's okay. They didn't finish middle school, but they had 0 tolerance for me not doing well in school and going to college. I don't know where that came from, but to them, education was everything. And certainly all of my teachers were inspiration throughout school, encouraged and inspired me to read, write, and dream big. And my first career mentor was my motivator. And I know we'll probably be talking about mentors, but I have to put it under motivation because she saw in me what she went through and didn't want me to experience the same things. She came from a poor family. In fact, it was just her mother who was a cleaning lady. And yet this woman went on to Wellesley College on a full scholarship and was one of the first women, one of first 3 to attend Harvard Business School. She had challenging jobs in a world of men, and she paid the price for it. She smoked 3 packs of Marlboros a day. And yet she unselfishly never wanted me to experience all the challenges that she faced. And she believed I could do more than I thought I could. And I did, thanks to her.
Wow, these were really some inspiring stories. And I thank you all for just being so open in your responses. I just wanted to let our guests know if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to use the chat function. We want this to be as interactive as possible, and we'll try to make sure we either get to your questions as we're going through the stories, or we'll get to them at the end at our Q&A. So feel free to use that function. So for our next question, what are some of the things that you accomplished to help women in their path forward that you are most proud of? And we'll start with Patty.
Okay, I just muted myself. Well, for my first job as a manager, all the way through to I ended up as president of Nobel Learning Communities. I've always focused on diversity. I never called it that, and actively hired and developed women who have gone on to be accomplished professionals in so many different fields and are positively impacting others. I also encourage them to be very actively involved in community service. This was something that my parents did, even though we didn't have any money. They felt that they needed to help the poor older people. And I wanted to make sure that that just became part of the individuals that I was focused on as part of their DNA. I also worked hard to improve employee compensation and benefits. Equal pay was not a given, but I could certainly impact that if I were managing people or running an organization. But I remember one company didn't cover birth control or OBGYN visits. And I overheard this in the restroom. We all know that scene from 9 to 5 where the supervisor's got her feet up and she's in one of the stalls and she's listening, but she was reporting back negative things. But what I would hear is people, women, certainly since I was in the women's restroom, being honest about their concerns, and I was in a position to do something about them. One woman said she couldn't afford to see her doctor because it wasn't covered under our benefits, and sick leave was limited to 3 days. I pushed for change and also pushed for educational tuition reimbursement because a lot of the women had not had the opportunity to finish their education or continue their education. And then I even established a scholarship at my alma mater, which I can talk more about later.
Great, thank you, Roberta.
Some of the things that I did. So before I joined the law firm, I started my career as a lawyer within banks, within financial institutions. And so the first one where I led the law department, which was PSFS, I was the first woman and first person of color hired. Everybody in the department was a white male. And 6 months after I got there, I was promoted to head of the department. And we won't even talk about how difficult that was. But the first hire I made was a woman. We didn't, as I said, I was the only one that they had. And I felt that it was important for there to be another woman in the department, who could do really good work. And so that was my very first hire. When I was in-house at another institution at PNC, I had a secretary who was very smart, and she came from a background where her parents couldn't send her to college. And she said, I want to become a lawyer. And I said, well, then you should. And I, pushed her and encouraged her. I helped her get a promotion out of the secretarial group into, a higher level so that she would be eligible for tuition reimbursement. And that worked. And she did go on to law school, and I helped her with recommendations. And now she's a partner in a small firm. And there have been women who were in my firm, and I said this in our breakout session, whom I made sure got work when I had large projects to give to other lawyers. And I would tell the lawyers who were taking my projects for my clients that they would have to include, and there were, a couple of women, one in the Philadelphia office, one in the New York office, that I mandated be included in any projects that were done for my clients. And then there are women that I have mentored for a long, long time who have done wonderful things. And I have to just say one thing, that one woman I've been mentoring since she was a client of mine in New Jersey was just hired to be the chief counsel, the general counsel for the Obama Foundation in Chicago. And I've been mentoring her for almost 10 years. I was one of the people to give her a very lengthy in-person recommendation. So that's probably my most accomplished mentee. But those are three different ways, 3 or 4 different ways that I've promoted women, hired them and promoted women.
That's awesome. Dr. Bratnatsky?
I think formal and informal mentoring is something that I'm really glad I have the opportunity to do. I have mentors myself, and I get to serve as a mentor now. Some of the programs I've been able to establish are certainly related to my role, but then informal mentoring, I think, has also been, a great way to give back, to encourage other women. And the theme around whether it's formal or informal, one of the areas that's meant a lot to me is encouraging women to find their authentic voice, their authentic self when they lead. There's a million books and tons of advice and all the rest of it. But the theme that I talk about all the time with the women I engage with is you be authentic, right? It's whatever the mold is, you can break the mold. It depends. And certainly I know I'm thinking about Patty and Roberta. I think it's easier now. And I think depending where you work, it's easier or harder. In higher ed, it's certainly easier. But there's still a lot of patriarchy, and there's still a lot to overcome. So that I'm proud of. And there's quite a few women who would have never imagined themselves moving beyond where they were. And now they are in really great places and have gone on, et cetera. And certainly I'm not taking credit for those things, but they have let me know, right, that seeing it and some of the ways that Madeline Adler did for me, just imagining, I could do that. And I could do it the way that I feel authentic doing it. It doesn't have to be exactly like somebody else. So I'm happy that I've gotten to give back on that.
Maureen?
So Tiffany, there are a couple examples that come to mind, and it's interesting because they all stem from things that I wish I had. And then when I had the opportunity to create that for someone else, I took the opportunity. So the first thing that comes to mind is a mentoring program that I developed with my employer when I lived in Virginia. I worked in the accounting department and I wanted to advance. I knew that I could do more than I was doing at the time, but there was no pathway. I had no way of, figuring out what to do. I had a very traditional boss, and he wasn't going anywhere, and he didn't really give any thought to the folks who might want to do something else. So I ended up, taking a different job within the organization, and fortunately eventually became the CFO for the organization. And I created a formal mentoring program, not just for my region, but for the whole enterprise, which spanned 5 states. And I handpicked folks in the finance because I had the opportunity to meet different folks from the various markets. So I knew who the rising stars were and those who were wanting to do more and maybe, didn't know how to do it. And so I invited them into this mentoring program and then reached out to executives across the 5 states and matched the mentees with the executives so that these mentees would have the opportunity to talk about their aspirations and get advice from folks, because not every leader, not every manager can give that to you. And if you're stuck in a place where the hierarchy is so strict that you can't, have access to other leaders, then you become stuck. And I felt, especially for finance folks, a lot of us tend to be introverts. I am a raging introvert, and it's just not in my nature to seek out networking and go find people to help me get where I need to go. So I was fortunate to have the support of the CFO for the enterprise in developing this program for the finance team. And before I left, the enterprise took what we were doing in the finance team and made it an enterprise-wide program. But I was very happy to have the privilege and the opportunity to do that. And then more recently at Chester County Hospital, I had the privilege of creating a leadership networking breakfast for African-American women in healthcare. And the inspiration for that was hearing about the experiences of some of the folks who encounter racial situations from patients or in the community, and just feeling a burden to create a safe space for these healthcare workers who give their all. They show up and they're giving everything. They're caregivers, or they're working in nutrition, but they're giving everything for the health and well-being of our community. And I felt like they needed to have a space where they could feel appreciated and talk about their aspirations and inspirations. And so I created this breakfast, and this is pre-COVID. And we would invite 15 or so women, all levels of the organization. They would come to breakfast with me as a CFO, and we just talk about who inspired them, and just thank them for the work that they were doing in the hospital. And it's interesting. I had that program going when things became really tense with the awareness of how far we need to go as a nation towards racial equity and reconciliation. But that program was already in place, and it was just a great space for us to continue the dialogue. And of course, with COVID, we had to stop doing the breakfast, but I'm so glad I had the opportunity to do that, and so grateful for all the women who I met through that program, because they continue to inspire me.
Thank you, Charmaine. I think you also answered the next question, which was the journey of moving an idea to action. So you definitely answered that, and how you saw an issue and you just leave it to where you were. You expanded it across 5 states. And so I'll have my other panelists answer that question. What was your journey of moving an idea to action? And was that action incremental, or was it sweeping action? And I'll have Dr. Bernatsky start.
Sure. So it's contextual, right? I think that there are moments when it's important to do something incremental, and then there are moments when it needs to be sweeping. So I try to use incremental when I'm doing things like this, only because it takes less political capital and you can build buy-in, et cetera. But when there's something egregious or urgent that needs to be done, I've also made sweeping change. So I really think it just depends on the context, and I think that flexibility can just play into the level of buy-in or the cost it's going to take to do something sweeping if you have to sort of force people to comply. And I've had to do both.
Roberta?
Okay. So, and this was in the context of the firm. One of the barriers to women making partner, at least at big firms, is the ability to bring in business. And one of the things that I saw was that, and I think anybody in a big firm sees that. It's why a lot of women either don't make partner or why they leave. So I worked with our head of training, and I think they called it training and education, to start monthly sessions for business development for the women. And we used training materials that our training group developed, but more importantly, we brought in outside coaches so that the women could meet with coaches. And I would go from, I do the Philadelphia office, I do the Chicago office, the New York office, San Francisco office, the LA office. I'd go around the country to various offices where we would have these sessions. And then once each group was set up, they would meet monthly to work on business development. Sometimes it was role playing. It was just different things. I mean, it's not, I'm not a teacher in that area, but we brought in the experts to do that. And the other thing that I got the firm to do was to give, quote, scholarships, so-called, so that women who wanted to have one-on-one coaching on how to bring in business could pay for it. So the firm would pay for most of it, and the woman would make some contribution so she'd have some skin in the game. But the bulk of the money would be paid by the firm for one-on-one coaching on how to develop business. And I thought that was really critical, because that's a major issue for women being able to maintain their positions in firms.
Thanks, Roberta. Patty? Patty, you're muted.
There we go. It was stuck. I was so fascinated with what Roberta was saying. You know, I want to be a lawyer now and work for her. You know, I found that what I needed to do as the operations person, I was the driver of the business. But on the other hand, I still needed partners to make differences in equal pay for equal work, as well as the benefits. So I was quick to always partner with the HR person. And fortunately, that was usually a woman, because that was a field that was open to women, right? And then also with my general counsels at the companies I worked at. And fortunately, they were women. So when we had things like inequities throughout the business, both from a hiring standpoint or benefits and compensation, I could get immediate buy-in from them. And then there was power in numbers. There were the three of us going after the others, because sadly, Charmaine, the men were the CFOs and the CEOs. So if I would have had you, we could have moved things along quicker. But you know, that made a difference. And then as far as incremental or sweeping, I would have to say, given the times, that it was incremental. My sense of urgency would want it to be sweeping, but then I would be perceived as a bull in a china shop. So you had to back off and play it, even though you knew you were ultimately going to get it, because if you're passionate about what you believe in and it's the right thing to do, you can make it happen. Sadly, there's still so much more to do. And when we lived through this pandemic, we've seen women lose their jobs, or they're forced to quit due to childcare not being available, which just breaks my heart. Or they got COVID or had to care for others who were sick and didn't have sick leave. And certainly there's still a lot more for us to do, because we can do better than this.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to what Patty said about having folks allies to help you. I didn't accomplish any of that without having allies. And at Chester County, the HR leader, who's a woman, was my ally. And at my other job, the CFO over the system was also a woman, and she was an ally. So, you know, I think it's important to find like-minded folks in the organization who you can, you know, coordinate with to move ahead some of these initiatives that if they can relate to what it is that you're trying to do, it's more likely that they'll help you accomplish what you need to accomplish if you're trying to make sweeping change or incremental change, either way.
Thank you. My next question, as a woman or as a woman of color, with the motivation not only to just succeed for yourself, but to bring others along as well, what have been some of your challenges? What has been your superpower in success? And conversely, what has been perhaps maybe your kryptonite? And I'll start with Dr. Bernatsky.
Let me start with the superpower, because it will relate to the other pieces. I think the superpower for me is forthrightness, honesty, the ability to have the uncomfortable conversation. That comes pretty easy for me now. It didn't always, and it has become, I would say, a critical piece of the way that I lead. The challenges, of course, related to that are around dealing with whether it's organizational lack of transparency or lack of transparency relationally, et cetera. That there's been a lot of challenges that I've had to sort of address over time with that. And at the end of the day, that's been the thing that has really made a difference for me, is finding my own again, being authentically myself and being comfortable with engaging in those sorts of forthright and honest conversations. I think the kryptonite related to that, and it might sound odd, but the kryptonite for me is compassion. And that is, at the end of the day, you're dealing with people and humans, and they have lives and families and their own concerns. And I am a deeply empathetic person, and my empathy and my compassion sometimes makes it hard. You know what the right decision is, but then doing it, right? When you think about the people that inevitably, sometimes it's not going to be what they want, and it might put them in a situation that you wouldn't want to see them in. But as a leader, you have to do the things that you have to do. So compassion and empathy are good qualities, but they can be the thing that make me sort of at risk of losing my resolve around the things that I know I need to do when I lead.
Thank you. Charmaine, would you like to answer?
Yeah, so being in the finance field, I think one of the challenges I've had is just I don't automatically get the I want to say respect or recognition for whatever my position is, no matter where I am in the organization, and especially as a CFO, because a Black female CFO is a bit of a unicorn. You don't see that often. And, I've had experiences where I walk into a meeting with someone on my staff who happens to be a white male, and folks assume that that's who the CFO is because they know the CFO is coming to the meeting. They've never met the CFO. And so I have to be careful to not see myself in a lesser light just because others don't automatically recognize what, the value I bring to the table. So I have to, there's one voice in your head that's always telling you, you're not worthy, you're not as good. And you have to drown that out with the other voice that says, you know what, I'm not perfect, but I'm working hard. I can do this, and I absolutely deserve to be here. And it's that constant making sure that the voice that gives you the courage to keep going is louder than the voices that are there that are telling you that you don't deserve to be there. So I was listening to, I recently started listening to podcasts. So that's my new COVID thing. I listen to podcasts, and I was listening to a podcast, and they talked about the word perspicacious. And I'd never heard that word before, but as they talked about perspicaciousness, which is this ability to step back and see the big picture and connect dots that are not necessarily, intuitive to other folks, and being very perceptive and discerning. And I really like the word because I think throughout my time since coming to the States as a teenager and, getting to where I am now, I think I've developed that. I don't know if it's a superpower. I think it's a gift in process, but I really like the word. And I think it's one of those talents that I think I want to keep working on, but I definitely think it's helped me get to where I am today.
Thank you. Patty?
Try this again. It worked this time. Well, early on in my career, I am very comfortable admitting at this point in time, it wasn't back then, that I would get very emotional about any injustice that I experienced. And there were lots of them. There were numerous times that I was paid a lot less than male colleagues who had the same job. And many times they had a better title than I did. I experienced a lot of discriminatory actions in jobs that I was interviewing with. The questions that were asked, I won't even repeat there because hopefully they don't ever happen again. And sometimes I even cried about it. It was just like, okay, this is what I got to deal with. But it took me a long time to channel that emotion into constructive actions. I realized I needed to confront the issues. Of course, it helped to have a position of power to do that. So when I got that, I was certainly more aggressive about it by asking questions, listening and learning, and then speaking up with solutions. So if I couldn't do anything about the issues, then I just knew it was time to move on, because I need to believe in myself and I need to surround myself with people that believe in me. Others tell me that my superpower is motivating people, but I would say my superpower is being a problem solver. And that's how I've ended up where I am, that I don't see anything as a big problem. I just try and instantly figure out a solution. And of course, that can be the kryptonite too, because it's full steam ahead on solving that problem. I think maybe the two work together, motivating and problem solving, because you can't do it by yourself. You want to motivate people to help you pursue that, but they have to believe in ultimately what it is that we're working together on. And if I believe in a solution, I believe I can help make it happen. That doesn't always mean that I've been successful by any stretch of the imagination, but I do face every problem believing that I can solve it. And then if I fail, I focus on what I've learned from the failure.
Thank you. Roberta? You're muted, Roberta.
Challenges and superpowers. So, and I think part of what we're supposed to be honest here, and this would happen just when I have to go off on mute, right? And it's a spam call, so I can't pick it up. It's like from Allentown, Pennsylvania or something, no name. Sorry. In any event, so in being completely honest, and I found the fund supports us in doing that. I have to say that when you're a lawyer, I mean, I passed the bar at age 25. When you're a lawyer, you have in certain settings automatic credibility. So in some settings, you don't have to prove yourself as much. You still have to prove yourself for your job. But if you're in a corporate setting, it's less so. So my challenge initially was just feeling that I could do the job, sort of like Charmaine was saying. And my first general counsel was a woman, and my legs used to literally shake every time she walked into my office. You would have thought I was in the Arctic in a bathing suit. I was just like petrified every time she walked into my office, but I learned so much from her. I was there, it was after I left that job that I went on to become a general counsel myself. And so that's only a challenge, definitely when you're starting out. When I was made a general counsel in that group, where I was the first woman, first person of color hired, and then made everybody's boss in 6 months, that was one heck of a challenge. And I'll talk about that later as a mentor, but finding whether I could manage was huge, because lawyers don't manage. Lawyers solve problems. We don't, have the kind of people skills that other administrators, maybe Patty has in running Nobel Learning and so on. So that was also a huge challenge. But, with the right support, you get through it. In terms of superpower, I would say on the good side, the superpower I have in working with so many mentees, and I do have a lot, and I've had most of them for, at least 6 years and some for 15, that I'm still very close to, is that I care. I really, really care. I really care about your career. I really care about prepping you for your interview. I really care about making sure you negotiate the best package when you're going to the next place, and I'll teach you how to do that, and I'll teach you how to ask. So I think on the mentoring side, my superpower is really, really caring about every woman that I've worked with and continue to work with. On the other side, I think my superpower is being a little ruthless. And in the world that I come from, it's not unusual, and sometimes it's necessary. So in getting somebody moved up so that she could be eligible for tuition reimbursement, that wasn't a walk in the park. You know, I had to go and talk to somebody and twist their arm to do that. In my firm, getting my partners to include these women that I identified on projects that I gave them wasn't something they gladly did and said, oh yeah, great, send me anybody, send me any woman you want, I'll be happy to do it. No, that's not how it works. Because in addition to the hours, in addition to doing a good product, in a big firm, you have something called profitability, which means that you have to be able to do the work at your rate and still make money for the firm. And that is a very delicate balance. And there are a lot of metrics around that Charmaine might well understand, but there are a lot of metrics around profitability. So I would really have to be pretty ruthless and say, you know, either you do it my way or there's somebody down the hall. And I will say I had to do that. There were times when I would get in a slew of litigation matters for a client. I might get 15 at once. And it was a package for a single client. And I would say to so-and-so, I'd like you to handle this. I don't do litigation, it's my client, but you got to have Tiffany on the matter. Well, you know, I've already got Joe and he's my, you know, my best guy. And I'd say, you know, I think so-and-so will do a better job. And I would just take it away. I just wouldn't give it to them. And in the long run, some of them would be coming into my office because my book was one of the biggest in the firm globally. So I couldn't be, I know someone was saying she was compassionate, and I think that's exactly right in certain situations. If I had been compassionate, I wouldn't have gotten any work for any of those women at my firm. Because the guys would have said, yeah, I am the best one to handle that, you know, that deal, but I've got to have my own guys for blah, blah, blah reasons. If I had said, okay, I understand, you want to be comfortable with the people you work with, but I didn't. I'd said, you know, I'm taking it away. So my superpower was being ruthless in support of the women that I was trying to promote. It may not sound pretty, but that's candid.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing all of those stories. I think it's so important, especially as we have women on this call, on this Zoom, who are in many different phases of their careers, just hearing these words of wisdom and knowing that that path may not always be a straight path or an easy path, but still a viable path to take in support of others and to stand up for something, I think is a wonderful takeaway from this conversation. My next question was going to be around mentors and allyship, but I think many of you talked about the mentors in your life and how you have been allies to women in your organization. So I will bring it to another question. And this question, not all of the next set of questions, these are not questions that everyone needs to answer. So feel free to chime in when you have a comment or response. So we know that so much has changed over the last year in regards to COVID, exposing and deepening the economic challenges of women, especially women of color, and they have faced that for many years. What are your takeaways on this? What advice would you give a colleague who is eager to take action in some way but doesn't know how to get started? Or what advice would you give a female colleague who is feeling overwhelmed juggling the many demands of her life right now?
All right, Tiffany, I'm going to jump in on this one since I didn't see anyone else go off mute. So it's a big question. So I'm going to share what comes to mind. So regarding the question of what advice do you have for someone who wants to make a difference but doesn't know how? And what comes to mind for me is a starfish story. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but it's a story of a boy walking along the beach, and he's picking up starfish that had beached, and he's throwing them back into the ocean. And, you know, an older gentleman comes up and says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm saving the starfish." And the older gentleman said, "Well, you can't save them all. You know, you're not going to make a difference." And the little boy said, you know, as he threw another starfish in, he said, "I make a difference for that one." So I just suggest that you think about that. If you can make a difference for one person, you never know, that one person can make a difference for someone else. So don't always think it has to be big. You know, you can just start with something small, or start with one person that you know you can help, and you just never know how far reaching that can be. The other advice I have for female colleagues who are feeling overwhelmed, my heart has gone out to working moms during this COVID time, where they're at home with their kids, they're juggling being teachers and moms and everything else all at once, and it's hard. So the one thing I can say that hopefully will help you is just to remind you that you have to take care of yourself, and it's not being selfish if you need self-time. It's worth it for you to figure out what you can do for your own self-care, for your own mental health, and don't allow that mommy guilt to get in the way. You have to replenish. You have to find, you know, your way of stepping out of the chaos that is, and create some space and peace for yourself. So if you need to get permission, then I'm giving you permission. You have permission to be what others would call selfish, but I'm gonna call it self-care, so that you can you know, build that resilience and get through this, which hopefully will be in the near future. So.
Thank you. Anyone else like to answer that question on the panel? Okay. So my next question is, how much of your success was due to adapting to a dominant culture versus the culture accepting you and your true self? So I know many of you have spoken about going into spaces that maybe were not initially you felt were meant for you. And so there's always this idea, and I'm thinking of especially of younger women who are going into a culture that they don't know. And it's like, are you assimilating to that culture, or are you trying to, you know, be your true self and have that culture change? And how have you experienced that?
You know, it's interesting, and I'm thinking here again about the experience of some of my other panelists today certainly sounded like those situations required a lot of adaptation. Again, maybe because I'm in higher ed, I've been fortunate that my path involved more of the culture accepting me and my true self. But having said that, there was a lot of intentionality around that. And I can remember so I was faculty for a while, then I was a lower level administrator. When I became provost, that's a VP level job that's on the president's cabinet. And I can remember my second week on the job, and I have grown up here at Westchester, so these folks all know me and I know them. I got the job as an internal candidate. But I can remember literally the second week in my role here now, in the senior role, walking into my office, and in my little conference table, there were two vice presidents sitting in my office. And they weren't on my calendar, and they had a whole bunch of questions, and it happened to be around finance and budget. And I happened to be very good at that. So I, answered them and all, but I mean, it was clearly an ambush. And I have an assistant that's outside in a foyer, that is sort of in this common area. And I went through the meeting and, did all of that. And as they got up to leave, I told both of them that the next time that they wanted to meet with me, they needed to make an appointment. And when they arrived for that appointment, they needed to wait in the foyer. And I also reminded them that I am a peer, and that they needed to respect that position. And, I say that, and of course, as I say that, my heart's pounding and whatever, but they were, sort of shocked and taken aback, and it never happened again. So there are moments, right? Even there's scary moments sometimes, standing up for yourself, but it's critical that respect, just simple respect, right? I expect, I'll accept nothing less, and I expect nothing more. And you give that back to other people around you. So I think changing the culture, there's sort of dramatic moments like that. And then there are less dramatic. The other piece for me that was a really big piece was a culture of team. When I first became provost, we had a group of deans, and it was very much, the mentality was sort of the way a university is organized, right? There's colleges and departments, right? And sort of different groupings. And it was sort of every college for themselves. It was a lot of backroom deals and all kinds of stuff. And I didn't want that as a leader. And so the team, it started just with me and one other person, but over the course of 3 years, that entire group of deans has been replaced. Everybody who gets on board now fully is committed to being a team. We function absolutely in a very open and transparent way. And as I said early on about that sort of forthrightness and honesty, that is a quality that I want in the whole team. And so it's a big culture change, and that took time. That was more incremental. But I think it's possible now. It is possible now, especially depending your environment, to change the culture and not just have to feel like you've got to just be in that adapting mode.
So Dr. Bernatsky, there's a question in the chat. Someone asked, would you have been able to respectfully turn them away and told them to make an appointment instead of speaking with them right then and there? Would you have felt uncomfortable? And was there a way to do that without jeopardizing your position?
It's a great question. I will say I was so shocked that they were there. It sort of took me a moment. And as I sat there and realized what it was about, I thought, you know what, I can just slice and dice them right here in this meeting, which to me was more important in that moment, for them to understand that this ambush didn't faze me in the slightest in terms of not being prepared, because I knew all the numbers and I knew the stuff, just because it's what I did. So I don't know. I could have, I guess, had I thought about it, and I ended up doing that at the end just because I was so taken aback. No one's ever done that to me, and no one's ever done it since, but it's a good question. And let me just say this, I would not have jeopardized the one piece I really should make clear. I happen to have a fabulous president who I know would have my back. He is married to a labor attorney who is a wonderful feminist in her own right. So I certainly had courage to do it because I know he would have absolutely backed me up, even if I had said, respectfully or disrespectfully, take a hike.
Thank you. My last question, as your careers advanced and developed, how did your efforts to help other women shift, if at all?
I can go with this one. Oh, sorry, Roberta.
We'll do Patty and then Roberta.
I continue to mentor and coach women because that's the right thing to do. But as I've become more financially secure, I'm in a position to support more women through community service and nonprofit organizations that help women and families, like the Fund for Women and Pathways, PA, and I have a pretty loud voice these days because, when you feel pretty comfortable in life, you can be louder. So I move other women to actions that make a difference for others. And hopefully some of that happened this morning. One of the things that I was going to cover earlier was that, it's not just mentors and mentoring, but it's having thought partners and collaborators. And I have several on this call today that are willing to sacrifice their time, Donna Brennan and Ann Dunn and Kate Sennett, who's actively involved in the fund, who we have a group and we have Zoom calls, and I think that's very important in your career. I didn't learn it until much later. And to actually formalize it, give it a name, have your happy hours, have your dinners, and have time to spend with people. So that was a shift I made. It wasn't just people that I was mentoring and coaching. And by the way, I do that for life with them, because you want to stick around long enough to experience their success and feel like you're part of it. But I mentioned earlier too that one other thing that I've done, and I'll just spend a minute on, is that with this growth and the financial security, I was able to set up a scholarship fund for young women that go to my alma mater, Ohio State University, and are focused on journalism, and which is what I graduated in, and investigative reporting. And these ladies are brilliant. There's been 6 so far, and they've gone on to work for NPR, the New York Times, and even the Peace Corps. And I know that getting their strong start that they did in college and not have to worry about the finances was a very important part of that. And 2 investigative reporting things. So you talk about paying forward and having other people make a difference that you've impacted. One did an investigative report, and you'll appreciate this, Lorraine, on the university. The paper there is totally independent. It's not funded by the university, so there's no censorship. She did an investigative report on the inequities of pay and tenureship for female professors, and won all kinds of awards for it. Then another one did an investigative report on the challenges young women who are in college face that have children. And you know, they are going above and beyond what I thought would be possible based on what I was able to do for them. And I realized early on that without education, I could have ended up, you know, an unwed mother, you know, not having any benefits, in minimum wage job, you know, all of that could have happened to me. But when you have organizations like the fund to support and encourage young women, and people like on this panel and the ones we heard earlier that are always paying forward by making a difference with others, we are changing things. It's, you know, for me, it seems slow, and I'm sure people feel that way as well. But I welcome the opportunity now to help those that are less privileged, because I'm privileged. I'm white, I'm not an immigrant, I'm now educated, I'm financially secure, I have healthcare benefits that are great, probably better now than ever before. And with privilege comes responsibility. And that's what I think we're all about. We can make a difference, and that's the legacy that I want.
Thank you, Roberta.
So was the question about legacy or about melting into a culture?
The question was, as your career developed and advanced, how did your efforts to help women shift, if at all? And it could be your legacy also, however you would like to answer.
So one thing I wanted to say earlier, actually, because we were talking about, you know, bringing your authentic self and how do you adapt to a culture? Does the culture adapt to you? I wanted to say that when you start out, you're going to have to adapt. So just face it. When you come out of college, when you come out of law school, when you come out of business school, when you come out of nursing school, whatever you're coming out of, and you have your first job, you are not going to walk into any place other than your parents' business and say, this is who I am, now adjust to it. So that's just to keep in mind. You go in and, you know, maybe the first 6 months you sort of figure things out, and then you ease into, this is who I am, this is how I behave, this is how I need to interact with people. But day one, right out of school, you're not going to change the culture by yourself. And I will say that the longer you're at it and you're doing well at it, the stronger you feel and the braver you are. You know, I was brave enough to tell people either do it my way or the highway. I'll give the work to somebody else because I was older and I was secure. I wouldn't have done that when I was 25 and just passing the bar. So, you know, just keep in mind that some of this you have to mature, you know, you have to mature into. How have I changed? I think the way that I've changed, and I will say, and I think we've said it before, that mentors come in all shapes and sizes. And because when I came through, my mentors were white males. Two of whom I'm still very, very close to. The one who made me general counsel over all the white guys at the firm is still very, very close to me. And the person who brought me into Reed Smith and put me up for partner 18 months after I got there is still a very, very close friend as well. So we have, you know, we have to look for our partners wherever they are. I don't know that I have a legacy. I mean, I think that there are, as I said before, women that I've been mentoring a long time that I'm still mentoring. And I hope that they will be my legacy. I mentioned one is now going to be helping run the Obama Foundation. Another is at LinkedIn. Another is currently in Puerto Rico working with her law firm and you know, one's at the Federal Reserve. So they're just sort of all over the place. So I think that if I have any legacy at all, it'll be that, number one, I will have demonstrated both in-house and in a firm that Black women can be very effective, they're very smart, and can generate one heck of a lot of business. Despite what the statistics may say, we can do that. I've done it, and I hope that, you know, that'll show people coming after me, people who are still at the firm, that that can be done. And the second thing is, I hope it'll be that I really do care, you know, that if I become your mentor, then you're mentoring me as well. And it's a lifelong commitment, that it shouldn't be transactional. You can sponsor people and that can be more transactional because you kind of have to be in the workplace with them to be a sponsor. But to be a mentor, I think, can be a lifetime commitment. And that's what it is for me.
Wow, thank you so much to all of you. Your candor, your stories, what your vulnerability, your willingness to be bold, to speak up on behalf of not just yourself, but the women that surrounded you, who looked up to you and needed you to be that voice for them. I thank you on behalf of them for maybe all the thank yous you didn't get along the way, the recognition that maybe you didn't get along the way. I thank you personally for that, and just your willingness to share these important stories to people who are trying to be in your positions along their way or are already there. So before we close out, there is a few minutes for questions. So if folks have questions or want to put in the chat, we'll be happy to see. Oh, we have one here. How do you recommend building respect from colleagues upon first entering a company or industry without a lot of experience or right out of college? Some of our panelists want to take that question.
So I would say just focus on being excellent in everything that you're doing. I think especially when it's your first job and you're going in, you need to build a reputation of being excellent at whatever it is that you're doing and to have just a spirit of excellence. And I think that's a good foundation to then build off of as your tenure grows.
You know, I would add,
I'm sorry, Charmaine. I thought you were.
Go ahead, Lorraine.
You know, just adding to that, and it's interesting, you know, Roberta made a point just a few moments ago, right, about when you're first there and you know, sort of adapting, et cetera. And that's important. And I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more with Charmaine about excellence. But I guess for what it's worth, and maybe this gets back to the thing about just knowing who you are authentically, you know, there will be moments even in the first 6 months or so, or even that first year, where there will be people who absolutely
are going to sort out if they have to respect you or not. So even if it's not a dramatic revolution or throwing people out of your office, or I would still say, and I'm even thinking back to some of my very first weeks here at Westchester, when I had to stand up for myself. Chris, our president, used to call my department 12 angry men. And that's what they were. I mean, it was political science, very male dominated. And I can remember even in those first few weeks, having to really push back hard. You know, my dad was in the Navy and said something I remember him saying, Laurie, sometimes with guys, you just have to punch them right in the nose, like figuratively. And so I guess for what it's worth, I would still say that there's moments, right? And in your own way, and don't get fired, but you might just have to also figure out ways to stand up for yourself, draw some boundaries in order to get that respect.
The one thing that I would add to it is relationship building is very important. And people don't like you necessarily until they know you. Now, they still may not like you after they know you, but at least make the attempt. You know, I would say that relationship building has been key to my success throughout. It's hard to disagree with somebody you really, really like. So make them like you.
Awesome advice from our panelists. Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tiffany, and thank you all. It has really just been an honor to lift up your voices and lift up your experiences throughout the morning. Everyone was so excellent, and I know we will have a lot to think about and chew on as we move forward. So just as to wrap up, if there are closing thoughts or final words that you want to add into the chat box, please feel free. We will be following up with a post-event survey that will be hitting your inbox soon, and I think also coming through the chat. So please take a minute to complete this, because this really will help you stay informed and connected to events and programs that are important for women and girls in Chester County, but it also helps us know, you know, what we could be doing better and what could we offer you all to ensure that you continue to receive the education and the tools to help in your leadership path or in your work. So again, I just want to thank you for spending your morning with us. I hope you're walking away more cognizant about who's around your table and just better equipped to pull up more chairs or to pull up a chair for yourself, right? So again, thank you for the time and thank you for your support, because it is the proceeds of today's event that will go towards supporting our 3rd annual Girls in Action Summit on May 15th. So in other words, your participation today will really benefit the next generation of leaders, so we can continue to enact these ideas and move this forward. Also in May 7th, we'll be holding our annual Making a Difference luncheon with both virtual and limited in-person options. So I hope you are able to join us either online or in person. And so more information about both of those events are going to come through the chat. And if you're interested in sponsoring either of those events, please feel free to reach out to me or Dana Wiley, our development director. And just stay tuned. We will be launching the 4th edition of our Blueprint Report in the fall. And I didn't even have a chance to mention that Lori is actually our godmother when it comes to the blueprint. She authored the first 2, and we are so thrilled that we've been able to continue the relationship with Westchester to now work on our 4th edition. And of course, it is so timely and so critical as we rebuild after COVID-19 and really shine that spotlight on how women and girls are affected. And I also wanted to mention that the fall is also when we have our annual Champions of Change event, which is the time when we are honoring both that company and an individual who you have all met this morning, our past honorees and recipients. But as we move forward, we will be looking to nominate others. And so if you have ideas, please feel free to reach out to me to share, you know, either whether that be a company or whether that be an individual. We put that question in the post-event survey, so you can share that info that way, or please feel free to reach out to me directly. So that's all I have. Again, I just want to thank you for your time and your support, and I hope that you were fed and nourished as much as I was, and I wish you all a great weekend. Take care and thank you.